Darlene lay next to her current lover. Her hand lightly slid over his chest. Although he was not as well defined as her husband, and he never told her why or how a 30-year-old man could have an 8 when few people achieve even a 6, and did not explain where he got it from. Scars similar to gunshot wounds. She loved being married to her husband, but she also really enjoyed sex. Darlene didn't want to hurt her husband, although if Alan ever found out what she was doing, she knew their marriage would be in the trash. And you can't blame Alan if he chooses this path. She only hoped that she could get him to accept the fact that she would continue to date random men. However, the man with whom she now shared a bed was not a stranger at all. It was her sister's fiancé. She understood that if Tracy found out, she would be seriously furious. After all, this wasn't the first time Darlene had stolen her sister's boyfriends. Not that she was proud of it, but whose fault was it that they weren't loyal? Although she herself was not faithful, but, unlike them, she did not shout about her devotion only to deceive behind her back. Darlene had never taken a man to her home. She was not going to desecrate her marital bed for the sake of a fleeting connection. For her, it was never about searching for something that she was missing in her marriage. She didn't want to start a serious relationship with anyone else. She already had Alan. There were no rides together, no secret calls, and she never deprived Alan of the opportunity to enjoy sex. In bed with her lovers, Darlene did nothing that she did not or would not do with her husband. After all, if she refused her husband something that she offered to her lovers, this would mean, even if he knew nothing, that he was an empty place for her. But in fact, this was far from the case. Alan treated her almost like a queen, although lately he has been acting distant. For 2 months now he had not allowed her to approach him intimately. Even though he still slept in the same bed as her, it seemed like Alan had become more of a roommate than a spouse. What is he doing and why? Darlene asked herself, turning over onto her right side. I can't believe how cuckolded Alan looks. Don't you dare talk bad about Alan, Darlene snapped. Her shoulder-length hair, black as night, touched her back as she looked over her shoulder. Did I say nasty things about my sister while we were having sex? No, although her fiancé is just a vile womanizer. At least I admit what kind of person I am. I don't scream about fidelity only to then lie and secretly sleep with my fiancé's sister. She hated men who thought that because she was cheating on her husband, they were allowed to insult Alan. As soon as someone said that, she would never meet him again. Come on, Dar, Alan must be. Pack your things and get out. No one, you hear, no one is allowed to insult my husband, understand? Darlene growled, barely containing her rage. The light from above illuminated her firm C-cup breasts, and her brown eyes glared furiously at Nate. Be glad I don't tell Tracy what an unfaithful jerk you are, she added, heading to the bathroom. No, she didn't need to wash. She always used protection. She never wanted to bring any infection into the house, and pregnancy from someone else didn't appeal to her either. This honor was intended only for Alan and no one else. Dar, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just thought that's what you want after sex like that, Nate said through the door. Leave before you say anything else, and I throw something at you. Okay, I'll call you later. Darlene didn't notice when Nate left, and to be honest, she didn't care. It infuriated her that he considered himself better than Alan. Nate was exactly like her, the same womanizer, and this in no way made either him or her better or superior than Tracy or Alan in moral terms. Contemplating whether to tell her sister who she was marrying, Darlene left the motel room. Tracy always thought of her in the worst light anyway, and you couldn't blame her. Is it Darlene's fault that she is a hot, sexy girl of 25 and that any Tom, Dick, or Harry wants to have her? Yes, she really cheated on her husband, but she always returned home to her loved one. Never stayed overnight with any other man. Taking her phone out of her purse and walking down the gallery, she inhaled the aroma of motel soap still lingering on her skin. She scrolled down to the name Alan. Biting her lip, she wondered if her husband would allow her to stroke his sex abs, as she had done many times before these 2 months of distance. Most of all, she wanted to know why he didn't want to touch her. Every time she asked, Alan referred to a headache, said he was not in the mood or was too tired. Yes, these were all excuses that women often use. This worried her terribly. Is Alan having affairs too? But she immediately discarded this thought. Alan was not one of those people. Or does he still know what she does during her lunch break? Darlene desperately hoped not. She had no idea what she would do if she lost him. She looked at the screen with alarm when the call was dropped on the first ring. Soon she typed a short message asking why he wasn't answering. Busy was the only answer from him. Busy. What is he doing? Darlene exclaimed, walking down the stairs from the second floor. Please call me, I'm worried about you, she quickly typed into the message. His aha made her blood run cold. It sounded so cold, so indifferent, as if next to her was no longer the same man with whom she had been married for 3 years. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to get back to the bank before the lunch break ended. Alan, that was his cover, real name Eric Lyle, was dying of boredom, sitting at his desk in the CIA Black Operations Control Center. He longed to return to the field. It was there that he felt alive. As a spy, Alan learned not to trust anyone, not even people on his own side. He was trained both as an assassin and as an agent. On his account, there were many liquidated traitors. Due to the failed operation in Libya and the injuries he received, he now had to sit in the office. His partner then saved his life by helping him escape the country. And for 3 years now he has been playing the role of the husband of an unfaithful woman, and it has tired him. But he needed to keep his cover in case someone tried to find him again. Then he could imagine himself as an ordinary married man, and not as the deadly weapon into which he was turned. Although, in truth, he didn't care that Darlene slept with others. He didn't love her. She's just a cover. As soon as he is given the green light, he will again go into the shadows and disappear, as has happened more than once. Alan rolled his eyes as the phone vibrated on the table. He immediately dropped the call, not wanting to talk to his wife right now. Even if this marriage was a sham, he believed that she could be more consistent in it. Clicking his tongue, he switched the picture on the spy satellite and watched his wife walk through the motel parking lot, and then returned the satellite to normal mode. Darlene thought she was cunning and resourceful, since he did not notice her intrigues. You would have to be blind and stupid not to guess. The only thing that slightly softened his hostility towards her was that she did not do this at his house. Otherwise, he would have to kill her. But he liked her sister Tracy. From the data he collected, Tracy truly was a good person. Alan had no intention of getting married, even fictitiously, without thoroughly studying the people he was getting involved with. Therefore, he was well aware of Darlene's tendency to cheat even before he accidentally encountered her. In fact, that's why he noticed her. After all, this task was temporary. He did not plan to sit at an office desk all his life. So in the future, when he files for divorce, no one will be particularly surprised. Eric, he heard a quiet, attractive voice in the earphone to his left. Alan smiled, realizing that only one person in the agency knew his real name. Yes, Maria, do you need anything? Alan asked, speaking into the microphone. He vividly recalled how the sun's rays in the desert played on her warm caramel skin. He switched her line to a private channel so that their conversation would not be overheard. I'm being transferred back to the States, and I'm wondering if we should go have dinner together, Maria asked, looking at the center of Rome. About? First time I heard it. It's just that everything doesn't feel the same without my partner. I always felt calm when you had my back, like you did in Libya. You're my partner, and I don't want to meet and introduce someone new, Alan grinned. And yes, to your question, I would be glad to have dinner with you. Is it true? Maria gasped. She never thought she would be so lucky. Since the evacuation from Tripoli, she has fallen more and more in love with the man who took 3 bullets intended for her. Of course, Alan responded. He found it amusing to hear her breathing erratically. I hope that when I return, we can send you to the field again, Maria said, and thought to herself that then she would be able to spend all the nights with him. God knows I want this. I'd rather be shot by terrorists than die a slow death at this damn table. Understand, You're not the kind of man who can handle a 9 to 5 routine. You need action, explosions, and, most importantly, a sniper rifle in your hands. You read me like an open book, Alan grinned. Of course, we went through a lot together, Maria answered, remembering how they once stumbled upon an oasis somewhere in Egypt several years ago. She vividly imagined how the moonlight fell on Eric's naked torso as he washed himself with cool water in the night air. I have to go, otherwise they'll think that the killer is sitting and smiling stupidly, she joked, hearing him chuckle quietly. I'll call you when I land. I'm looking forward to it, Alan said, and the connection was interrupted. For the rest of the day, Darlene replayed her husband's recent behavior in her head. The bank employees noticed that she wasn't acting like herself, but she couldn't share her problems without sounding like a hypocrite. If her husband cheated on her, sighing, she leaned back in her chair. She felt terrible. This is probably exactly what her own exes felt when they found out she was cheating on them. Suddenly, her sister's number popped up on her phone. You damn bitch, Tracy exploded. Tracy, I can explain everything. To hell with your explanations, Darlene. I've had enough. Every damn time I get something going, you come in and ruin everything. What's wrong with you? I don't know myself, Darlene answered, wiping away her tears. But I swear I wasn't after Nate. It was he himself who made contact. What do you mean? Tracy asked, slowing down. Do you remember that picnic a couple of weeks ago? The one that Alan didn't even bother coming to? Yes. While you were taking Karen to change her soiled dress, Nate started making advances towards me and saying beautiful words. I kept up the conversation, but I had no idea of betraying you, sister. He seemed truly in love with you. Yes, I'm still a bitch, but I love you, sister, and I didn't want to spoil your wedding on purpose. But he called me yesterday, and I wanted to make sure he was serious. After all, if he decided to cheat on you a few months before the wedding, then after the wedding, he will also cheat on you. In a way, I wanted to protect you from. God, your brain is completely askew. Do you hear what you are saying? What will happen when Alan finds out that his wife is an ordinary woman of easy virtue, huh? I'll tell you right away, Darlene. You have crossed all boundaries, and in front of your eyes, I will drag Alan into bed. Tracy shouted angrily and passed out. Darlene buried her face in her hands and began to sob. She understood that she might now have completely destroyed her relationship with her sister. God, I'm so lonely. Alan, I need you so much, she sobbed, shaking with sobs. Yes, Darlene, what happened? She suddenly heard her husband's voice. Alan, please tell me everything will be okay, she whispered pleadingly. The tears froze as she waited for his answer. Everything will be fine, Alan responded in an indifferent tone. Do you promise? I can't promise because I don't know why you're even crying, Alan lied. In fact, he knew everything. It was he who anonymously called Tracy and said that Nate was not who he said he was, and suggested that she ask her fiancé why he came to the Blue Light Motel, room 234, and why her sister left the same motel a little later. You've been so cold lately. I miss you, my love. I miss your hugs, the way we took showers together and pounced on each other, the evening cuddles on the couch while we watched our favorite show. I miss this. I understand. It's been such a mess here in the office for the last few months. I'm trying to get a big client. I am very worried that I might ruin everything and then lose not only the deal, but also my job. I didn't want to worry you. Alan lied. He carefully wrote down in his mind all the tall tales that he came up with as he went along. Darlene was not supposed to know that he was a CIA agent. She doesn't have access to such information, and she definitely won't be able to keep her mouth shut. My God, darling, you should have said it. Why did you keep it to yourself? Darlene asked, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I didn't want you to worry about me being unemployed. Fool, we are family. If that happened, we would find a way out. Yes, you might have to move, but you could definitely find a place for yourself. I know how hard you work. You put so much effort into this deal, your bosses probably see your efforts. So next time something like this happens, be sure to talk to me, Darlene said with relief, glad that her husband did not cheat on her. She was already imagining the worst options. And we could, well, make love today. Alan sighed mentally. He didn't really want to, but it still wasn't the worst sex of his life. Although not the best night of his career was with one of the wives of the Prince of Saudi Arabia, with whom he slept for the necessary cushion information. Well, I'm just on my way home, so if you don't stay late at work, he hinted at the fact that she often uses overtime for meetings on the side. Then you can count on luck, he said insinuatingly. He was not taught this charm, he possessed it on his own. I promise I'll be home by 6:30, Darlene exclaimed, rejoicing and anticipating how she would finally feel about her husband. Hey, Dar, Dan from the accounting department looked in. Would you like to go to the bar in an hour today? He was hoping to get her into bed before he went back to his nagging wife. No, Dan, my husband is waiting for me at home, Darlene snapped, always emphasizing that despite the betrayals, she puts Alan first. He's lucky, Dan muttered as he left. Then the phone rang again, and the name Nate flashed on the screen. What do you want? Because of you, my sister now hates me, because you couldn't restrain yourself and pestered me. It was a test, and you failed it. Darlene got angry. Fuck you, Dar. Did you have to tell her everything? Nate yelled. What? I thought you were the one who confessed. Darlene felt the ground disappear from under her feet. She collapsed into a chair, realizing that someone had seen them and knew who they were. And the question is whether Alan will now find out about her connections. Why else would Tracy call me, angry as a fury? You've gone crazy. You're hot, sure, but not so hot that I'd run to Tracy and admit that I just slept with her sister. Fuck you. And you know what? I'm even pleased that my sister now knows what a scoundrel you are. I'll go home, Darlene muttered, grabbing her bag from the bottom drawer. If the days of her marriage are numbered, she at least wants to fully enjoy the time that remains. Alan, Darlene called as she walked into their one-story brick house. Alan, she repeated when it turned out that the house was quiet. Honey, where are you? The fear in her voice grew as she hurriedly searched the rooms. After all, he should have arrived an hour ago. Alan, please answer. Her voice became almost desperate when she entered the bedroom and saw his briefcase on the bed. God bless, Darlene breathed, looking up in gratitude. She continued her search and came across her husband in the backyard. Oh, she gasped when she saw how the muscles of his torso tensed during training. Alan hung upside down with his feet hooked to the bar and did crunches while throwing his fists forward as he rose up. The sweat on his skin glistened in the sun. Darlene bit her lip as she watched all the muscles on her husband's body move and shimmer under the skin. My bunny should be given a reward for such a body, she thought cheerfully and almost tiptoed towards the back door. There you are, honey, Darlene said seductively as Alan finished another climb and hung upside down again. Darlene, what are you doing at home so early? He asked, looking down at her. I just couldn't get you out of my head, she purred, her eyes lustfully devouring every line and relief of the muscles of his torso. And you, my dear, don't want to take a look at this downstairs? She asked. Darlene, Alan gasped. And what? For 2 months you ignored me, constantly rejected all my attempts to renew intimacy. And now I see you here, drenched in sweat, with this pumped-up body, and how can I resist? She said. What got into you? Alan asked as Darlene snuggled up to him. I just miss you so much, she whispered, burying her face in his neck so that he wouldn't see how she was holding back her tears. She couldn't let him notice her feelings. Then he would start asking questions that she was afraid to answer. The risk of losing him forever is too great. She hugged him tightly, feeling him return the hug. Darlene raised her head and greedily pressed her lips to his. Take me inside and make love to me, Alan, she whispered. Alan did just that. You get dressed, and I'll start preparing dinner, Darlene said tenderly and kissed him lightly on the lips while Alan dried himself. With a smile and flushed cheeks, her robe brushed her hips as she walked out of their bedroom. Alan sighed heavily to himself. He hated being so deep under cover. People get attached and start to think that there is something between you, although in reality there is not. He missed being back in the field where he belonged and not having to deal with an unfaithful woman. Rubbing his temple, he realized that he would have to push all these thoughts back into the depths of his consciousness. He looked up at the door when he heard music Darlene always turned on the radio when she cooked. A gentle smile played on Darlene's lips as she watched her husband out of the corner of her eye. Her hips swayed to the sounds of That Kind of Feeling by the Luzex Blues Gang. Her bare, smooth leg flashed from under her robe as she walked towards him with a smooth gait. Wet hair fluttered in the air as she moved to the beat. Crap, she cursed under her breath as the timer went off. Her palms gently patted his chest and she kissed him lightly on the lips. Expensive, Darlene called, quickly seasoning the chicken breasts they were going to cook for dinner. She was glad that she was lucky, and Alan agreed to switch to a healthy diet with her. What do you think about taking some ballroom dancing lessons so that we can get out of the house together for a couple of evenings? Darlene asked, looking over her shoulder as she sprinkled rosemary on the breasts. I don't need lessons, Alan responded indifferently. Alan. She puffed out her cheeks in irritation that he had so dismissively dismissed her proposal. Let me finish before you rip my head off. I don't need lessons because I already know how to dance, Alan said, getting a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Really? Darlene said, raising an eyebrow and placing her hands on her hips. Don't believe me? Alan asked, looking at her challengingly and taking a sip. A mocking smile appeared on his lips as she nodded. The agency gave him lessons in case it was useful, and indeed, in a couple of cases, the skills were useful. Well, finish there and I'll show you, he said, walking away with a smile on his lips. Alan, I'm done, so where are you? Darlene called, leaving the kitchen when the asparagus was already boiling. Outside, Alan's voice came from the open door. Alan, I don't think we should be dancing in the backyard. I'm not wearing anything, Darlene said embarrassedly, pointing to her robe. And what? The neighbors won't see us, Alan said, standing on the brick patio they added to the house after purchasing it. A light wind ruffled his pajama pants and ruffled his light brown wet hair. You yourself didn't believe that I could do it, he said, extending his hand to her. Darlene's heart was pounding. She knew Alan could dance, but she didn't realize how gracefully. Her cheeks burned as she looked into her husband's eyes, feeling him gently holding her close to him. She seemed to not know her husband at all. Why did he hide this from me? She asked herself, hugging his belt. What else is he hiding from me? She thought as they circled in the rays of the fading sun. Rising up on her fingertips, she gave him a long, lingering kiss. She absolutely loved feeling his hard body next to hers. I need to check dinner. Thanks for the dance, darling. We should do this more often, Darlene purred before slipping back into the house. Alan? Darlene raised an eyebrow as she looked at the message that came through her phone while she sat at her desk. She remembered how she had made eyes at him the entire dinner, how she had not let him go all evening on the sofa, snuggled with him while they watched the latest episode of The Witcher, and then spent an hour having sex, which Darlene craved so much when it was all over. Did something happen, Tracy? Alan sent a message, putting his phone aside. Yes. Are you busy? Not really. And what? Can we meet at my house for lunch? Tracy, what's going on? You usually don't call or write to me. I know, and I'm sorry. It's just that Darlene and I have a very difficult relationship, and I couldn't help but take it out on you. Sorry, but now I need to talk to someone. Okay, but shouldn't you talk to your sister? What are you talking about? She's the reason I got into this shit. I hope that maybe you can help me figure out my problem. I don't think I see any reason why not, Alan answered, guessing what they might be talking about. Great. Thanks, Alan. I'll see you at, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that okay with you? Yes, that will do, Alan replied, wondering what she was up to this time. Thank you, Alan. I hope you understand how much I appreciate it. See you at 1 o'clock. Alan sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He wondered if other people had to deal with similar problems with their in-laws. He never understood family life and the reasons why people want to get married. So far, even the fake marriage to Darlene had been terribly draining. Give him spies, terrorists, or self-proclaimed dictators. This is his element, and not all this. Hello? Darlene muttered, hastily swallowing a piece of salad. Hello, my walking sister, Tracy said contemptuously into the phone. Tracy, God, I thought you wouldn't want to talk to me anymore. Darlene sat up straighter in her chair, dropping her fork into the salad bowl as she ate lunch in her office. Don't think that I will ever forgive you. Tracy, please, I know I've let you down so many times and I don't deserve another chance. But we are sisters, you can't just erase me from your life. I agree to go to therapy if you need proof that I'm truly sorry, Darlene pleaded, hoping to win her sister's affection again. Oh, so you want to show how sorry you are for sleeping with my fiancé and ruining all my dreams for my upcoming wedding, right? Tracy replied, hatred rang in her voice. God, yes. I'll do whatever you want to prove how important you are to me, Darlene said, trying not to burst into tears. She didn't need bloodshot eyes at the upcoming meeting in an hour. If so, Darlene swallowed hard when she heard how ominous her sister's voice had become. Alan will come to me soon, and you know what, dear sister, I can tell him everything down to the smallest detail. Please, Tracy, I beg you, don't do it. Alan doesn't need to know about it. He's happy, I'm happy. This will kill our marriage, Darlene pleaded. So it was completely normal for you to ruin my wedding, and now it's so important for you to save your own damn marriage while constantly cheating on Alan. Do you know? I understand how it sounds, sister, believe me, I understand. But I love Alan, I can't imagine how to live without him, Darlene sighed bitterly, realizing that she couldn't stop her sister from revealing her dirty secret to her husband. Do you think I wasn't in love with Nate? I know I was, sis, Darlene answered barely audibly. But he was not for you. I saw that he was just a womanizer. I knew right away that if he hit on me at a family barbecue and got me a motel room, he wasn't the one for you. I didn't want you to discover this after a few years of marriage, when you put your heart and soul into it. It would break my heart because I love you, sister. I don't want you to suffer as much as you could. I know that sounds. She started before Tracy could say anything. Maybe you should just not be such a partying person, Tracy seethed. I tried, sister, but I just love sex, and I can't stay faithful for long, no matter how hard I try. I really tried, believe me, I tried. For the first 6 months after the wedding, I was faithful to Alan. And all this time I was simply bursting with excitement when Alan was late at work or went on a business trip. Maybe we shouldn't have gotten married, but I fell in love with him. For the first time in my life, I sincerely experienced this feeling. He was the first man I ever said words of love to and really meant it. Oh my God, Darlene, you're just a walking disaster. I know, Tracy, I'm a complete bundle of contradictions myself. Darlene lowered her head. And what are you going to do? She asked, hoping that her sister wouldn't tell her husband the truth about her, even though she deserved it. I will give you a choice of exactly how to destroy you. You can watch me having sex with your husband on video, just like I once found out that once again my loving sister got my next boyfriend, and then I won't say a word about what you. Either you refuse and I will still get it, but at the same time I will tell him what you are like. Either way, you're in shit, Tracy gloated. You promise you won't tell him anything? Darlene clarified nervously. Yes. Then please take care of my Alan, Darlene managed, her lips trembling as she imagined a strange woman touching her husband's body. You really love Alan in your own way, don't you? Tracy asked in surprise, hearing her sister's voice break. Why, yes, Tracy. I love him very much, and it breaks my heart, Darlene admitted, trying her best not to burst into tears. Great. Now you will feel what we feel when you sleep with any man you meet. What does it feel like to know that the man you thought was faithful is about to cheat on you? Tracy dripped salt into the wound. Tears flowed from Darlene's eyes. She understood that she deserved all this. Everything my sister said was true. She never asked her lovers if they were married. She didn't care. And now Darlene wondered how many marriages she had ruined simply because she liked to have sex almost every day. "Oh, look, he's already parked," Tracy added mockingly. "Please, Tracy, don't tell him." "I don't want to lose him," Darlene begged, and tears flowed with renewed vigor at the thought of such an outcome. She knew she didn't deserve to be married to such a kind man. Rather, she should have married some domestic tyrant who at least would not mind deceiving, and not for her caring, gentle, understanding Alan. Deep down, she still hoped that when everything was over, she would still be his wife. Tracy looked in the mirror in the hallway of her two-room apartment. She and Nate rented it in hopes of starting a family while they saved for a house. She understood that she could not place all the blame on her sister alone. Darlene had always been a well-known woman of easy virtue, so the news about her adventures did not shock her. "My sister has gained fame for a long time." Tracy hoped that Darlene would settle down after graduation, but it seemed she couldn't break old habits. Maybe she really needs sex addiction therapy. But all this did not compensate for the pain that Dalen caused her for years. Tracy thought that Nate would resist her sister's charms, but she was sadly mistaken. And yet, not only Darlene is to blame for what happened. Nate himself fell for her tricks. She would happily thank the anonymous person who sent her evidence of Nate's infidelity. Applying a little soft pink lipstick to her lips and running her fingers through her shoulder-length, auburn-dyed hair, Tracy looked at herself once again. She didn't want to be like her sister. Darlene had a slender figure and a breast size of 32B, and she herself had a 38C with a height of 165 centimeters and slight excess weight, which, however, did not particularly bother her. Her heart beat faster. She was unusual in seducing a married man. But she didn't want to take away Alan for good. She just wanted to get even with her sister for all the insults. "Well, let's go," she muttered to herself, opening the door and seeing Alan waiting in the hallway. "Alan," she smiled at her brother-in-law, inviting him to enter. "No problem," Alan replied, trying not to show dissatisfaction in his voice. Whether by accident or design, he noticed how Tracy was dressed as he walked past her. "Sister, you're a fool," Tracy thought, looking at Alan's back. Sure, Nate went to the gym regularly, but he was nowhere near the musculature that was easily visible under Alan's dark blue shirt. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked when she closed the door behind him and discreetly turned the lock. "No, thank you, I don't have much time," Alan replied, maintaining the image of a reserved husband. "But—" She slid her hand under his elbow. "I need a strong man now," Tracy purred, snuggling into his arm. "I assure you, you should listen to what I have to say," she added, looking up at her son-in-law. She knew that Alan was not very close to her family, but her parents had long since given up on the fact that he did not often appear at family events. The main thing was that he cared about Darlene. Tracy herself wasn't particularly against it either, since she didn't favor her sister at all. "Okay, lead the way," Alan agreed, gesturing her forward. "Let's go into the living room," Tracy suggested, taking his hand. She gave him a soft, warm smile as they walked deeper into the apartment. Running her hand along her own buttock, she sank down next to him on the sofa. Her head was tilted, her gaze was directed downward, as if she was thinking intensely about something. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Alan asked, trying to ignore her maneuvers as she sat so close. He noticed how she looked down at her lap. Darlene told you about what happened with Nate?" Tracy tried to make her voice sound shaky. She wiped a few tears from her eyes. "No, I didn't tell you." "Should you?" Alan asked, handing her a napkin, feeling how embarrassed she was. "Yes, I should." Tracy nodded, wiping her eyes and cheeks. "Nate cheated on me with a woman who was easy to eat," she exploded bitterly. Alan tried not to show how funny it was for him to hear Darlene's sister call her a woman of easy virtue, not suspecting that he was talking about Darlene herself. "I'm sorry, Tracy," he replied, stroking her back sympathetically. "But why did you come to me with this?" "I want." She placed her hand on his thigh, feeling his muscles tense as her fingers slid along the inside of his pant leg. "I want someone to help me forget about that freak Nate." she purred, looking hungrily at Alan. Tracy, he said, stopping her hand, I'm pleased that you think so of me, but perhaps I'm not the one with whom you should do this. I understand your doubts, Alan, she continued in a whisper, giving her voice a more sensual note. At first I hesitated, but I promise you will like it. Without letting him come to his senses, she showered him with kisses, in which uncontrollable passion raged, and instantly slid onto his lap. Tracy, I think. He trailed off. You don't have to think, Alan. Her sentence was cut short when someone drummed sharply and loudly on the door. Crap, she exhaled through her teeth in irritation because she was about to enjoy it. With a heavy gait, she walked to the front door. And just as she was about to turn the lock, the door flew out and the handle hit her. You damn bitch. I've been knocking for 2 minutes. Nate hissed, his tongue slurred from alcohol. Here's to you for throwing me out of my own house, he roared, pushing her against the wall. Look at yourself. Who are you dressed up like that for, huh? Call woman, Nate yelled. Ah, here comes the cuckold, Nate spat when he felt someone grab his arm. Why, you're mad that I slept with your wife before you, huh? Before he could finish speaking, Alan struck. Tracy could hardly believe her eyes. Well, are you jealous? Nate scoffed. No, I just don't care, Alan whispered in his ear. If you think you didn't know what she was like, then you're even dumber than you look. And this is for imagining himself to be a man, raising his hand against a woman, he said. Turning around, Alan saw someone running into the hallway. Don't worry, Tracy, I called the police, said an unfamiliar woman, standing near the entrance to the apartment. It's okay, Wilma, Tracy replied. Alan, is he? Alive, just passed out, Alan answered dryly. It's good that you were here, Vilma said, watching the police enter the apartment. She was surprised that Alan seemed almost unharmed. Yes, it's really good that you were there, Alan, Tracy smiled. Rockford Police, everyone stay put. One of the officers commanded, putting his hand on his holster. Officer, it was me who called, Vilma entered the conversation. Ma'am, did you report domestic violence? Yes, my ex-fiancé, whom I kicked out yesterday, broke down the door and started beating me. He probably would have killed me if it weren't for my brother-in-law, who stopped him, Tracy said. Ma'am, do you have a place to stay? The officer asked, taking a photo of her. Alan, she turned to him. You'll have to sleep on a single bed, he said, raising an eyebrow. Are you sure you don't mind? Tracy clarified, worried and trying not to blush. No, I don't mind. We'll probably need you to come to the station, but for now you can take Miss home, the cop said as his partner read Nate his rights, and he groaned on the floor. Can I change my clothes? Tracy asked, embarrassed. Certainly. And bring clothes for a month, while the apartment is considered a crime scene. Thank you, I'll quickly. Alan, she quietly said his name and went into the bedroom to change clothes. She firmly decided that when the apartment was returned to her, she would immediately move. She no longer wanted to stay here, where Nate could easily find her. Besides, if her father, brothers, and cousins find out what Nate has done, they will not leave a wet spot on him. Take care of her, Vilma said, touching Alan's hand. I'll try, Alan replied calmly. Perfect. This is exactly what I needed now, he thought. Little sister, I didn't think you'd call so soon. Alan isn't one to get over it quickly, Darlene said when she heard Tracy's voice on the phone. Thanks for the new information, Tracy chuckled. I'm actually calling to say that Alan is taking me to his place. What? What does to yourself mean? Darlene asked alarmedly, instantly imagining how she would catch them in the midst of sex. Nate showed up, and it ended in a fight. As a result, Nate will now go to prison, and your sweet, caring, great husband invited me to stay with you, Tracy answered, savoring every word, because she heard the panic growing in her sister's voice. Imagine, after he satisfies you, he will take care of me. What do you mean, after me? Did you tell him everything? Darlene was horrified, feeling as if the ground was disappearing from under her feet. I? No. But Nate told me, Tracy commented with an evil grin. God, God. Darlene babbled, realizing that now her ideal marriage was doomed. It was as if she saw how it all ended in disaster for her. Well, what does it feel like to realize that your husband is leaving your hands? Tracy asked, enjoying her sister's suffering. My life is over, and you... Serves you right, Darlene. You can't endlessly sleep with everyone and hope that you can get away with it, Tracy muttered through her teeth, trying not to let Alan hear. She loved hearing her sister cry. T. Tracy. What else? Promise, please, that you will sometimes visit Alan or at least find out how he is doing. Maybe he won't forgive me, but it hurts me to think that he will be left alone, suffering because of me, Darlene asked in a trembling voice, smearing mascara on her cheeks. Let's see. And Tracy dropped the call without answering directly. Okay, I promise, at least to have sex with him, Tracy said, taking one last parting shot before ending the call. Darlene collapsed on the table, clutching her phone. A photo of her and Alan smiling hand in hand while enjoying their honeymoon was on her screen as her tears fell onto the hard surface. Knowing that she would never find a man like him, hoping that after Alan got through the pain, he could find someone who would be kind to him, even if it wasn't her. The dreams she had, the children she would never have, now flashed before her eyes as she descended into a black pit of despair. Hello. Darlene answered without looking to see who was calling. I think it's time for you and me to talk a little. Alan, I know you must have heard. You have an hour to get home, and then we'll see what I do to you. Alan, his pseudonym, his real name was Eric Lyle, interrupted his wife. Oh well, Darlene whimpered, defeated, knowing that she was going home one last time to face the consequences of her past actions. Her gaze fell on the photograph of the man she loved so much standing on her desk. She just couldn't hold back when it came to sex. She had to have it. It didn't matter whether it was her husband or not. She didn't know why she needed sex so badly. This was not like her husband. She prayed that she would still have a husband after this. Sighing loudly as the line went dead, knowing it was the end if her own husband didn't say goodbye to her. Please God, I know I'm not the best person in the world, and yet I ask you that after this night I am still Alan's wife, Darlene muttered quietly. Reluctantly, she threw the strap of her purse over her shoulder. She kissed Alan's photo, knowing that it would be the last time her lips would be near her husband's. Looking sadly into her office, she turned off the light, knowing that her family life had come to an end. Darlene cried loudly in her car, sitting in front of her house. The house that had held so many pleasant memories for her over the past 3 years. The home where she hoped to one day raise her family. She might be the worst wife in the world for him with what she does, but Alan was the only man she could honestly say she truly loved and meant it. The only man she would like to see as the father of her children. However, she knew that she needed to get out of the car, walk with unbearable legs to the front door and face what she had brought upon herself. This was her punishment for hurting such a kind person. Darlene gasped in shock at what greeted her the moment she opened the door. The purse fell from my shoulder and fell to the floor with a crash. Her eyes just couldn't look away. Darlene just stood there, unable to utter a word or sound, watching. Oh, here she is, a woman of easy virtue, my sister, Tracy spat. Do you like to watch? What does it feel like, huh? Now, dear sister, we're even, Tracy said angrily. Thanks, damn Alan. We'll have to do this again someday, she stated, smiling back at the man who made her hum, unlike anything Nate could do. I'm going to jump in the shower and send this video to that ass. If you're ready for the second round, if she's not going to stay, you know where to find me, Tracy said. Alan? Darlene's voice shook as she saw no hint of emotion on his face as he looked at her. I wondered why her husband was so calm, for lack of a better word. He had just found out about her infidelity. She waited for explosions, cursed, and threw things around. Not that calm that surrounded him as he sat there. This made her much more afraid. Okay, it got out of hand, Alan admitted. He had never known Tracy could be so strong before. He will have to update the files he has on her and her family. Apparently, his first introduction to Darlene's family wasn't as thorough as he once thought. So, you weren't punishing me by forcing me into this. That wasn't my plan, no. Alan, honey, I know I messed up. I know what I did. Her voice trailed off as Alan raised his hand. How about we talk about this when I'm not having sex with your sister, okay? Alan spoke, wondering why he felt embarrassed that his wife, even if she was just a front, saw him after having sex with another woman. Not that this happened the first time. Crap, I've been underwater too long. I'm getting attached, he scolded himself mentally. Her mind was racing. If Alan was going to file for divorce, he wouldn't care what he looked like. Darlene thought to herself. A ray of hope flashed in her mind. Of course, Darlene muttered quietly, nodding. Her hand shot forward, taking her husband's wrist as he walked past her and into their bedroom. Please, Alan, can I be there with you? She asked, looking at him. Even if there was a ray of hope that she could save her marriage, she would still spend every second she could in his presence. In any case, fears become reality. If you want, Alan replied shyly. Thank you, Alan, Darlene whispered. Sit down, Alan ordered, pointing to the bed and walking over to the dresser. So you can't be faithful, right? I wouldn't put it as harshly as you do, but yeah, Darlene said as she watched Alan's underwear slide down his legs. So, you want a divorce? Alan asked with his back to her as he pulled out a pair of shorts from the drawer underneath, the one that held his underwear and socks. What? No, Darlene shouted, jumping to her feet. You just said you couldn't stop. Obviously, married life isn't to your taste, Darlene, Alan stated, glaring at her. I never said that I wanted to end this marriage. I love you, Alan, Darlene said, falling to her knees and raising her hands in prayer that he would not end their life together. Then help me understand how sleeping next to you will benefit this marriage. I know what it looks like, darling, but it was never about you. You have to believe me, I just need sex all the time. I don't know why, I just want to. I'll stop. She froze at the look of his eyes. You shouldn't promise something you can't deliver, Alan said in a monotone voice. I promise, baby, if you give me another chance, I will do whatever you want. You know, I have never deprived you of anything that I and my body can give you. What if I said, given that we both know you won't stop, that we turn this into an open marriage? Alan watched as Darlene's eyes widened as the phrase open marriage left his lips. He didn't expect Darlene to run up to him like a spider on a hot plate, and he didn't expect her to hug his legs while looking up at him. He knew that in a week Maria would return to the States and they would have sex. They would have done it in Libya, given the sexual tension that had existed there since the first day the agency paired them up, if their cover hadn't been blown. He also knew that the agency would never condone their relationship, so keeping Darlene as his legal wife would come in handy to throw them off the scent, so to speak. Alan, you're not kidding me, are you? I don't know if I would have survived if you had been there, Darlene said in a trembling voice. Have I ever lied to you? Alan asked, looking into her eyes. Of course he did. He did this repeatedly. Darlene just didn't know it. You promise that I can still be yours if I agree to this? Darlene asked, knowing things could have gone differently. While she may hate knowing that Alan was around other women, it's hypocritical considering the number of men she slept with during their marriage. However, she always thought that Alan would always be alone. However, sharing her husband with the world meant she could stay with the man she loved rather than wallow in her own self-hatred in some small apartment alone. Then she will do it. It may take her some time to come to terms with Alan sleeping with other women. However, it was something she was willing to endure. I only have one rule. He swallowed hard as his brow quivered when she said that. Don't do this to other women in our house again. I want this house to be just for the two of us and not be marred by images of naked bodies. And condoms scattered around. I insist that you use condoms, Darlene said, looking at him. She prayed that Alan would agree to her rules. These rules apply to you too, right? Of course, dear, Darlene nodded vigorously. I may have strayed from you from time to time, but I would never put you in danger because of my carelessness. The only man I want to feel is you, Darlene said in a loving light. So you've never been with? Nate? God, no. Nate will never be able to compare to you. Did I just do this to him to test him? Seeing Alan's confused look when she said that. Do you remember the picnic that took place a few weeks ago, which you did not attend? You know, that got to me, Darlene pouted. Anyway, the moment Tracy left to help Karen, Nate tried to cast a spell. I know that I really looked bad, but I tried to protect my sister in my own way so that she wouldn't have to waste years living this vile life. I understand. What do we have here? Tracy asked, leaning against the door frame, wearing only a towel. She only caught the last part, the part that mattered, the part where she could sleep with Alan as much as she wanted until she found someone new. Her light brown eyes followed her sister as she crawled towards her on all fours. She couldn't do anything about it, but seeing it brought a sadistic smirk to her lips. Tracy, I know I've caused you so much pain over the years. I know I'm a bad sister to you because of what I did, but I ask you to forgive me, Darlene said, prostrating in front of her. I will do anything you ask to keep you in my life. Oh, Tracy thought. You'll do whatever I ask, right? Yes, whatever, Darlene agreed immediately. Then I have some conditions of my own. Name them, Darlene said, raising her head and looking at her sister. You will watch me get your husband right before your eyes in this very bed, Tracy said, nodding at this. Second, when I start dating again, you will never sleep with my boyfriends again. If they attack you, you tell me right away. These terms are non-negotiable. In our bed, Darlene gasped. Oh yeah, in your damn bed, Darlene, just like I found you in mine with my boyfriend, Tracy chuckled. Oh okay, Darlene's shoulders slumped in defeat. Alan, HM, I need to get dressed. Thank you for dinner, she cooed, kissing Alan lightly on the lips. I'll sleep with you every chance I get, Tracy said, winking at him as she left the room. She could already feel how superior it felt to what Nate had to offer, and she was looking forward to the next time. Alan. Darlene looked away, embarrassed that watching her sister satisfy her husband turned her on. What? Do you? Do you think you can do it again? Darlene asked with reddened cheeks. Why don't you close the door and check? Alan teased, although he wasn't sure he could. He managed to hide his smile as Darlene jumped to her feet and quickly closed the door. Darlene lay cuddled up to her husband. She was incredibly grateful that he gave them a second chance. This peaceful moment was interrupted by a call on Alan's cell phone. It's me. Her brown eyes lifted to his face, hearing the tone in which he answered the call. It was an unfamiliar tone to her. She wondered who might have called. Did Alan want an open marriage because he was already dating another woman? Her thoughts flashed back to the moment she left the motel room after her meeting with Nate. Yes, I'll be there in 30 minutes. She raised an eyebrow in surprise. She wondered what exactly they told him on the phone. Alan? Darlene asked, propping herself up on her left arm as he stood up from the bed. What's happening? She saw him open the closet door and throw a pair of dress pants and a dark gray shirt onto the bed. It's from work. Something happened, Alan said calmly, picking up his clean panties from the floor that he wore an hour ago. But it's almost 5 o'clock. What could be so urgent that it cannot wait until tomorrow? Darlene asked, feeling her suspicions that he might be seeing another woman growing stronger by the second. I don't know, they didn't tell me, Alan replied, and they won't tell me over an unsecured line. He quickly added to himself. How long will you be gone? I don't know, maybe until later, Alan said, quickly getting dressed. He didn't notice the look Darlene gave him as he tucked his wallet into his back pocket. Won't you even kiss me goodbye? Darlene asked indignantly when he was already approaching the door. But as soon as he leaned in, she rushed to him and kissed him passionately in a way that no other woman he was going to could do. As soon as Alan left the room, Darlene jumped out of bed, grabbed the dress from the floor, and pulled it on. She needed to find out who this woman was. Where are you going? Tracy asked from behind her. Darlene muttered, watching Alan drive out of the yard. Then you'll need this, Tracy said, tapping her sister's bag, which she had dropped on the floor. I'll go with you. It's funny watching you flail around not trusting your husband, Tracy said with a cruel smile. Darlene didn't say a word, she just ran out the door. Darlene didn't say a word, she just opened the door and ran to her car. I left my sister to lock the house while she climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. She put the car in reverse before Tracy could slam the door. "We're in a bit of a hurry, aren't we?" Tracy remarked, clutching the door handle as Darlene drove to catch up with Alan's car. "I just know he has someone," Darlene muttered quietly. She wasn't going to lose her husband to some other woman. Yes, she may have cheated, but she never allowed herself to fall in love with another man. For her, this would be a betrayal of their marriage, no matter how strange it may sound. She glanced at her sister, who giggled. "This is just absurd, Darlene. You made a habit of cheating on him, and now suddenly you don't trust your own husband," Tracy said, laughing at the absurdity of what was happening. Darlene's cheeks flushed red. My sister was right. She realized that she was acting hypocritically by suspecting him. But the thought that Alan might be cheating on her tore her heart. Since she could not argue with her sister's words, Darlene decided to ride in silence the rest of the way. "Are you sure it's Alan who works here?" Tracy asked, looking at the skyscraper. "No, he said that his office is in a building on the south side." "What is he doing here?" Darlene said out loud as she parked in front of the building and watched Alan drive up to the guarded gate. She saw him extend his hand and insert something due to the distance. She could not see what it was. The gate automatically began to rise. "Sister, I have a bad feeling," Tracy said with a hint of worry in her voice. "This place looks like the government is working here, if you know what I mean." She noticed Darlene nod in agreement. "Have you never been to his place of work?" she asked, seeing her sister shake her head. "He always told me not to come. Said it was an unimpressive building and nothing to see there," Darlene said, repeating the words he told her when she wanted to invite him to dinner back when they were first dating. "Okay, maybe you're wrong about the other woman, but he's definitely hiding something." They both jumped when Darlene's phone rang. They breathed a sigh of relief when the screen showed a call from their father. "Let's go home, Darlene. I think that's enough worrying for today," Tracy said, taking the phone from her sister and answering the call. "Hello, Dad." The whole way home, Darlene replayed in her head everything Alan had told her about his job. He never received a promotion during all this time. She would have thought that with the number of hours he works, he would have been promoted long ago. But then she remembered that he had lied about his place of work. Did he also lie about what he really does? She bit her lip, wondering what was the lie and what was the truth, until they parked in front of her house. "Sister, don't get me wrong, but what if I say if?" Tracy raised her hands as she saw Darlene turn around as they approached the front door. "What if Alan isn't even his real name?" Tracy asked, seeing the shock in her sister's eyes at the mere thought. "There must be a reason why he lied about his job." "Well, seriously, who lies about their place of work?" Tracy tilted her head to the side and watched as her sister's shoes flew off her feet and Darlene rushed to the door. Tracy began to worry about her sister's mental state when Darlene began running around the house like a madwoman. She turned over couch cushions, tossed down picture frames, and overturned tables, searching for anything that might shed light on why Alan was hiding the truth. Tracy grabbed her sister by the shoulders, noticing the frantic look in her eyes as the living room and office looked trashed. "Pull yourself together, Darlene," she said, shaking her slightly. "What will Alan think if he comes home and sees all this mess?" "What if it's all a lie?" Darlene exclaimed, falling to her knees and covering her face with her hands, sobbing loudly into them at the thought that the man she loved could be a completely different person. "I don't know," Tracy said, softening her tone as she saw what her sister was worried about. Even though Nate was a lying bastard, at least she knew who he was. Tracy wondered what other secrets Alan was hiding from Darlene and their family. "Come on, I'll help you clean up before Alan gets back," she said, gently stroking her sister's back. Darlene nodded in response. "Thank you for coming back," the boss said as Alan entered his office. Alan nodded, standing still. You know why you haven't returned to the field yet. Alan simply nodded again. We have assumptions about who could reveal your identity in Libya. Yes, and who do you suspect, sir? Alan asked, taking a relaxed stance in front of the boss's desk. One of our own agents, which is sad. Alan tried to remain calm, although he was internally shocked when the boss turned Maria's photo towards him on the computer screen. We can't confirm anything yet. However, there is evidence that it may have been compromised. We believe that the person she is associated with sold your data to the Libyans. What are my orders, sir? Alan asked, trying to suppress his feelings for Maria. He knew he couldn't let his emotions interfere with the task. We know that she contacted you, since you worked so closely together, and she believes that we have no suspicion that she may be a double agent. We want you to find out whether there is evidence of her involvement or evidence of her innocence. This is strictly an informal assignment. You will act alone. Can you handle it? Yes, sir, Alan nodded. You are not allowed to eliminate her unless given a direct order. Is this clear? Extremely, Alan replied. Fine. Agent Acharya will be dropped off in Washington on Sunday night. We want you to be there before she arrives. After she is heard at headquarters, you must make yourself known to her. Everything you need is here. The boss handed Alan a brown folder. Study all the materials and don't show them to anyone. Got it, sir. I hope she's not a traitor. It would be a great loss for the agency to lose such a great agent. Alan remained silent, shaking the boss's hand. He knew it had to be a mistake. Maria devoted her entire life to service. However, it was not uncommon for the agency to burn its agents if their loyalty was in doubt, or to send someone like Alan to eliminate the danger. You are free. Take the weekend to prepare for surgery. And yes, Agent Douglas, go to the storekeeper and get a new encrypted phone. Yes, sir. Those were the only words Alan said as he left the office. His thoughts were spinning as he walked down the corridor. He wondered if the agency was trying to frame them both. He knew that if so, the consequences could be serious. With his experience, the agency could easily paint him as some kind of renegade mercenary. Alan nodded to the counterintelligence officers as he entered the elevator. Pressing the button for underground level B1, where the warehouse was located, he pondered the orders. Although he was willing to obey, that didn't mean he trusted them blindly. He was a spy and a murderer. He knew full well what the government does to those it considers expendable. At the warehouse, he was given a new phone, but he could hardly hide his dissatisfaction, noticing that it was a device with a non-removable battery. Knowing the agency, he assumed that the phone was bugged. Even if you keep the device turned off, the transmitter could work through the battery. This meant that he would have to take his phone apart as soon as he got home. In addition, he needed to visit the shooting range to brush up on his skills, in case Maria really turned out to be a double agent. In his profession, no one could be trusted. However, he had previously allowed himself to relax in her presence until the moment his cover was blown. When Alan returned home around 8:30 in the evening, he quietly entered the house. The sound of television could be heard from the living room. Looking around, he noticed that something had changed in the office since he left a few hours ago. He walked into his office, closed, and locked the door. Placing the folder on the table, he opened the hidden floor safe that was built in when he bought the house. He removed the contents of the safe, including his personal Sig Sauer P320 pistol, hid government materials, and heard footsteps outside the door. Alan, are you there? Darlene's voice was heard. I'll open it now, he answered, hiding the tension in his voice. When he opened the door, Darlene cast a suspicious glance at his face. Why was the door locked? She asked, trying to speak calmly. I was working with confidential documents, he lied. Darlene didn't say anything, but she clearly sensed that something was wrong. Is this why you had to go back to the office? Darlene asked, trying not to show how she felt about his lies. In a way, Alan nodded. Do you remember that project I told you about? Yes, and what's wrong with him? Darlene raised an eyebrow, feeling her suspicions only intensify. Things are not going well. Looks like I'll have to fly to Seattle on Friday night to try to get things straightened out. On Friday? But that's in 2 days. What about our anniversary? Darlene exclaimed. Our anniversary is not soon in 3 months, Alan answered. Not the wedding anniversary, but the day I met the man I fell in love with, Darlene said, adding tenderness to her voice. She wrapped her arms around his waist. Would you like to celebrate this with me? Since when do we celebrate this day? Alan asked, looking at her intently. Well, I thought that as we begin a new chapter in our lives, we should celebrate every important moment in our history together, Darlene replied softly, trying to figure out how he would get out of this. We'll celebrate when I get back, I promise, Alan said, trying to calm his wife down, and walked past her. Darlene watched him leave the room, and her gaze lingered on his office. She noticed that the table had been slightly moved from its place. Bowing her head, she wondered, did she even know the man with whom she shared the bed? She did not search in his office, afraid of arousing suspicion if she accidentally moved some papers. I left you a plate in the oven to keep the food warm if you're hungry, she said from behind him. But the look on his face as he nodded and headed into the kitchen worried her. This was not the look she was used to seeing. Why can't he just say what's going on? She thought, watching him carefully take the plate out of the oven. That night, Darlene tried to remain cheerful in front of her husband, but a chasm had already begun to grow between them. They barely spoke when they went to bed. It was the first night in their marriage that she did not fall asleep hugging her husband. 2 days later. I'll call you as soon as I get to Seattle, Alan lied, closing the trunk of his car. I'm sure you'll call, Darlene thought. Have a nice flight, Alan, and come back soon. I'll prepare something special for you when you get back, she said, trying her best to keep her face up. Her sister stood nearby, watching the farewell. Darlene didn't believe for a second that he was actually heading to Seattle. She was determined to turn his office upside down in order to finally understand who her husband was and why he was lying. I can't wait, Alan replied, sensing something strange in Darlene's behavior. But he didn't have time to figure it out. He had a task to find out whether Maria was a traitor. Despite the pain he would have to endure if she was found to have betrayed him, he was what he was made to be. An assassin forged by the agency. Darlene looked at her sister, who nodded. Tracy also wanted to know why Alan lied to her. They jumped into Tracy's car so Alan wouldn't notice Darlene's car and realize he was being followed. It wasn't the best option, but they still kept a safe distance, following Alan to a small airfield rather than a regular airport as they had assumed. Darlene, what the hell is going on? Tracy muttered as she watched Alan talk to two men in black suits before they walked together towards a small jet with a ladder down. How should I know? Darlene exclaimed, wondering where her husband was going to fly and who the two men were. For some reason, they gave her a strange feeling, as if she were watching secret agents, like in television series. They sat and watched as the plane took off, heading east instead of northwest as he had told her he would fly to Seattle. Her nails scraped against his jeans as she wondered if she even knew her husband. Maybe Alan has a reason for this secrecy, Tracy said, looking into her sister's eyes. But I'm his wife. I'm the one he has to tell everything to. Is it true? Are you sure this is the kind of wife he expected when he married you? Tracy noted, seeing Darlene look away, realizing that she could not dispute these words. I'm scared, Tracy. I'm afraid that I'll lose Alan. I'm afraid that if I find out the truth, he won't be the man I love, Darlene said, her voice trembling, tears sparkling in her eyes at the thought. We'll just figure out what we can, okay? Tracy whispered, hugging her sister. Although she wanted to blame her for the past, now was not the moment. I have a friend in the police. Maybe he can run Alan's name through the database. Okay, Darlene sobbed, wiping her tears. Let's go home and think about everything, Tracy said, seeing her sister nod weakly. When they got home, Tracy was on the phone while Darlene headed straight to Alan's office. Hey, Harry, can you do me a little favor? Tracy asked, placing her purse on the sofa. Of course, Tracy. What do you need? Can you give me one name? Or will it cause you problems? No, who do you want to check? My brother-in-law, Tracy said calmly. It's a little late to check his background, don't you think? Harry laughed. What is his name and where does he live? Alan Scott Douglas, Tracy answered, watching her sister move something heavy in the office. She hurried there and saw Darlene looking at the safe on the floor, stunned. They both looked at each other, then looked back at the safe. She had never seen such safes before, so complex and expensive. Harry, do you know someone who can open safes? Maybe. Send me a photo, I'll see what I can find out. Wait, what's happened? Tracy asked, sending a photo of the safe. Are you sure of his name? Yes, but what? Because my search attempt was just blocked. Tracy, what have you gotten me into? Her eyes turned to her sister, her heart pounding, trying to understand what they had stumbled upon. What do you mean blocked? Tracy asked, feeling the fear rise in her voice. It means some government agency has closed my search. That's what it means. Who is he anyway? You know, I don't want to know. Whatever it is, it's too big, and I'm not going to lose my job over it. Thanks for your help. I hope this doesn't cause you any problems, Tracy said, her heart pounding. Darlene squeezed her sister's hand, feeling it tremble with fear. This fear only increased her own. Who is her husband, really? As for this safe, it's old, it was once the best and very expensive. It won't be difficult to open it. Can you do this? Tracy asked in surprise. Yes, I work part-time as a mechanic. Opening safes is my hobby. I have the day off tomorrow, so I can pop in and see if I can open it. How much will it cost? Tracy asked, seeing Darlene nod, indicating that she was willing to pay. For you, Tracy, exactly 100. Thank you, Harry. You just saved us, Tracy said, trying to sound charming. If he had not played for another team, she would definitely have run after him and would not have had to deal with the fact that her ex-fiancé turned out to be a cheating scoundrel. I'll chalk it up to you, he said, and they both laughed before Tracy hung up. Come on, I think you should sit down to hear this, Tracy said, trying not to let the worry in her voice give her away. Harry mentioned what happened when he tried to run Alan's name into the database. Darlene sat in shock as she listened to her sister recount the conversation. Who is her husband? What could cause a government agency to block information about Alan? And most importantly, why? Is he wanted? Maybe he's in the witness protection program. Maybe that's why there were those people in suits at the airport. Maybe that's why he lied to her like that. What is his real name? All these questions were spinning in her head. She rose abruptly from her chair, unable to concentrate. There were too many thoughts in her head as she walked to the bedroom. She knew one thing: she needed to unwind. Even though she had not touched her husband for the past 2 days, she found it difficult to come to terms with his lies. She understood how it sounded. She herself lied to her husband all these years. Did she have the right to condemn him for his lack of trust? Dismissing these thoughts, she began to undress and turned on the shower. Remembering the last time she and Alan were intimate, she couldn't help but cry. While the steam rose from the shower door, she sat on the floor, covered in tears, like a broken woman. Seriously, do you think now is a good time to go out? Tracy said with disdain as she saw Darlene emerge from the bedroom wearing a red dress and matching shoes. I don't think you'll understand this, Tracy, Darlene muttered as she walked past her sister. Tracy already considered her a woman of easy virtue, and Darlene didn't blame her for that. She just needed to clear her head, and sex always helped. Don't wait for me, she said over her shoulder, hearing her sister's displeased snort as the door closed behind her. Darlene was sitting at the bar where she often hung out when she lied to Alan about girls' nights. In fact, she used these outlets to look for random men for future meetings. Now, however, as she sipped her gin and tonic, she couldn't get her husband, or more accurately, who he really was, out of her head. So lost in thought that she didn't even notice the 5 men trying to start a conversation with her or buy her a drink. She didn't hear a word they said until her eyes fell on an attractive, elegant man she had never seen in this bar before. It seems like a waste of the evening, sitting here alone and staring into your glass, the man said with a charming smile. Darlene slowly ran her eyes over his neatly styled black hair. Her gaze lingered on warm green eyes, which seemed to draw you into themselves. The light from the bar highlighted the perfect shape of his nose. Too perfect, she thought. I wonder how his lips would feel on hers. Is it true? Do you think so? Darlene said, raising an eyebrow to show that she was not impressed by his remark. Think. My name is Roger Goodell, but no, I'm not related, he replied with a grin, holding out his hand to her. Darlene couldn't help but roll her eyes at his joke. She needed to get Alan out of her head, and the man was undeniably attractive. However, no matter how much she wanted sex, she simply could not get the mood for it. Darlene Douglas, she replied, shaking his hand, noting in her mind the strength of his handshake that reminded her of Alan. She noticed how he sat down next to her without even asking permission. Confident, I see, Darlene muttered. Why not? Roger chuckled. So what brings you here this evening? He asked, signaling to the bartender. Would you like another drink? He suggested, noticing how wary she was. This did not match the information he had received about her in preparation for this operation, which was aimed at eliminating Eric Lyle, also known as Alan Douglas. Roger knew that many foreign powers wanted to see this man dead. That's why he started rumors that his former partner could be working for the enemy in order to lure Eric into a trap. However, he would take up this matter even out of pure revenge for the fact that he left him to die many years ago. Although the prospect of sleeping with his wife was something Roger was going to enjoy until the last moment. And then, when Darlene and the woman he noticed in the house were no longer useful, he would sell them at one of the slave markets. He had many clients who would not refuse 2 American women. Roger could hardly contain his evil grin at the thought of what they would do to them. No, thank you, Darlene politely declined. So, did you come to visit, or have you recently moved? She asked, looking into her glass. Visiting a friend for a couple of weeks. Why are you asking? Roger took a sip of his beer, trying to hide his grimace at the taste. He liked German Eisbock much better and considered local American ales disgusting. However, he knew that this bar was unlikely to offer anything better. Is your hotel far away? Darlene suddenly asked. Roger had to restrain himself from spitting out his beer in surprise. He thought that he would have to seduce her for a long time to get what he wanted. Did Eric really know that his wife was like this? And if so, could he use it against him? He quickly pushed these thoughts away. They both had training to not let their emotions influence their judgment. Eric refused the money when Roger offered him $3 million for his life a few years ago in London. Eric just fired. Roger still didn't understand how he survived. He was found and cured, but he vowed to kill his former partner. A few minutes from here. Do you want to leave here? Roger asked, turning on his charm. He saw that his charm had no effect on her, but he was not going to complain. He would achieve his goal. As long as you don't talk about my husband, Darlene replied, understanding that she needed a distraction, but not wanting to hear anything unnecessary. Not a word, Roger promised, holding out his hand to her and inviting her to come out with him. What hotel are you in? Darlene asked when they were outside. She wasn't going to go there with him in his car. She may have been an unfaithful wife, but she was not naive. The Dunhill Hotel on 5th Street, number 309, Roger answered, realizing that she would not agree to just get into his car. He didn't want to attract unnecessary attention at this stage of the operation. I'll meet you there, Darlene said, leaving him standing alone without waiting for his answer. What's the rush? Roger asked, leaning on his left arm. A sheet covered his lower body. Usually, he was the first to leave immediately after sex, and not the other way around. It was just sex, Darlene said, adjusting her dress. Yes, but that doesn't mean you have to. He raised his hands when she gave him a displeased look. Thank you for not mentioning my husband, but we both got ours. I doubt we'll see each other again, Darlene replied, putting on her shoes. We could continue to meet. I'm not in town for long, so your husband won't suspect anything, Roger suggested, noticing how her gaze slid over his torso. He noted that there was a flash of disappointment in her eyes. "You weren't bad," she said, and he began to smile, but she immediately added, "But you weren't the best either." She saw how his pride suffered from this remark. "Give me your number. I'll call you if you want, but not the other way around." She bent down to pull the sheet off him. "That's why you're not the best," Darlene said, pointing at his manhood. "I'm damn good, but you can't even come to your senses after I tortured you, unlike my husband. I'll call." With these words, she left, slamming the door. "Bitch," Roger muttered out loud. Although, by and large, he didn't care what she thought. He was still going to seduce her to get revenge on Eric. Opening the nightstand drawer, he took out an encrypted phone. "I'm there. The first stage is completed. No, let's postpone the second stage for a week. I want to ride this bitch a couple of times before moving on to the next stage. And then we will deal with the main purpose of our penetration into this country. I'll contact you when I'm ready." He threw the phone back into the drawer, where it hit the Glock 17 before it closed. "Senor." A thick Spanish accent came to him from behind the door, making him grin. The next day, Darlene stood in the hallway, nervously chewing her nail and watching Harry fiddle with the safe's combination lock. She tried to remain as quiet as possible while he worked. She turned her head when Tracy put her hand on her shoulder. Despite the look of disgust in her sister's eyes when she returned last night, Darlene could see that Tracy understood how important this was to her. Whatever was hidden in that safe, her husband did everything he could to hide it from her. Returning home that night, she finally noticed a voicemail and a missed call from Alan. She listened to the message 5 times before falling asleep to the sound of his voice. However, any memory of fleeting joy after meeting Roger quickly faded. He tried too hard to prove that he was an alpha male. Alan never needed it, he was that natural. Remembering him, Darlene thought about how his body always reacted to her, even after the most passionate night. She never felt cheap or used with it, which made it stand out from everyone else. Darlene's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call to her home number. It could only be one person, Alan. She grabbed the phone and ran out into the yard so as not to disturb Harry's work. "Alan," she asked, slightly out of breath. "Did something happen, Darlene?" The husband's voice sounded wary. "No, I was just gardening. I had to run home," she lied. "I hope it's nothing serious." "No, nothing I can't handle, darling." "How's Seattle?" "Boring, as always. But you know what happens at corporate events." "Alan, you know you can tell me anything, right?" "As strange as it may seem, I won't judge you," Darlene said, feeling the corners of her lips begin to lift at their conversation. "So if I say that I love being a furry, will you accept it?" Darlene couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Let me guess, you prefer to be one of the bears from Beresteins, but not a mother, I hope." She couldn't hide the amusement in her voice as she imagined Alan in a bear costume. "No, Peter Rabbit, actually." Sorry, it's just—" "You're in a bunny suit," Darlene burst out laughing at the thought. Then, with a more serious tone, she added, "But seriously, Alan, you know you can tell me anything. I'm your wife. Are you sure that you are my wife?" Alan said this in an accusatory tone that made her wary. She felt her mouth go dry. Did he really know something? "Is that so?" she said with a raised eyebrow, catching the accusatory tone in his voice, wondering if someone had hinted to him that yesterday she had tried to run his name through the database. "Certainly. Don't I always come home to you? Do you know how many men have promised to take me away for a weekend or a week to some private resort? But I turned them all down because I'm a married woman," Darlene said in a sweet voice, turning her nose up at the thought of spending time away from her husband. "Just checking." "So, when are you coming home?" Darlene asked, wanting to feel him next to him in their bed again. Despite her doubts about who he really was, she didn't want to dwell on it. She was going to make amends for not saying goodbye to him properly like she usually did. "Soon, perhaps on Monday or Tuesday." "Then when you get back, how about we celebrate like you promised?" Darlene asked, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "Of course, make a reservation." I hope you understand that this will be expensive, Darlene said with a sly smile. And I think someone here really wants their gift, Darlene sang in a sensual voice. Can you really blame me? No, I can't, Darlene agreed, looking at her reflection in the door. I want to dance. You know, what would happen with the ballroom? Oh. Darlene nodded, pressing the phone to her ear. Your wife wants to spend an evening in the town with her man, she said a little shyly. Yes, dear, whatever you want. And I also want you, but you're not here, right? Darlene exhaled with feigned resentment. Looking up, she saw Tracy waving at her and heard the sound of an engine from the other side of the house, which could only mean one thing. Harry had indeed opened the safe. Didn't you go for a walk last night? Yes, but I can't find a man like you there, Darlene said, feeling her cheeks heat up. Thoughts of what Roger had done to her immediately faded, replaced by memories of passionate moments with her husband. Glad I'm indispensable. You know, honey, I need to get back to what I was doing before I lose the whole day listening to your sweet words, Darlene said, feeling her heart flutter at her husband's light laugh. She was happy that his bad mood had passed. Okay, don't overdo it. I don't want to see you sweaty. Running her lips over her teeth at his playful tone, she replied, Are you sure you don't want to see me? No, I might like it. Okay, so it should. Can I call you tonight? Darlene asked, holding up a finger for her sister to wait. Of course, I'll be free after 8. Fine. I love you, Alan. I hope you know that. I love you too. Darlene felt remorse for what she was about to do as she looked at the phone, especially when her husband seemed to mean every word sincerely. She prayed that he really thought so that she could close her eyes to the things he was hiding from her. There have already been enough lies and deceit on her part in her life. She didn't want to face this from a man she considered so. Honest, at least in her eyes. Harry opened it. We didn't touch anything or look inside. We thought you should do it yourself. Fewer people going through Alan's things would be better, Tracy said, watching as her sister set her phone on the kitchen table as she walked into the room. Thank you, Tracy. I'll pay you back, Darlene replied, lost in thoughts of what she might find in the safe. Don't worry, I already took $100 from your wallet, Tracy said, watching her sister thoughtfully walk towards Alan's office. Okay, Darlene muttered, not really listening to what her sister said. She walked slowly towards Alan's office, afraid of what she might find, praying that this wouldn't become something that would ruin her love for him. She didn't know if she could live with this or be alone without Alan in her life. Tracy watched as her sister seemed to be out of her mind, moving mechanically down the corridor. Her heart sank with pity for Darlene. It's not easy to cope with the idea that the person you love is not who he seems. Maybe Tracy should have thanked her sister for her cheating. It just showed that those she was with were not her destiny. Shaking her head, Tracy still felt that Darlene had to answer for her behavior. But now her heart still sank with sympathy as she watched her sister close the office door behind her. Darlene's chest rose and fell heavily. Her heart was beating like crazy. Her palms were sweating as her gaze fell on the open door of the metal safe. Taking a step forward, she realized that she had gone too far to stop now. She knew that if she didn't look, she would never get answers to the questions that haunted her. Swallowing hard, she sank to her knees. Taking out her smartphone, she took a photo of the contents of the safe to make it look like she hadn't touched anything. She didn't want Alan to know that she had been rummaging through his personal belongings. She just needed to find out who the man was who shared her bed and heart. Darlene didn't know if she was going to confront him with what she found out. She began to take out folders and put them aside, taking them out of special compartments. Tilting her head, she noticed something at the bottom of the safe as she moved the folders. Medals? Darlene muttered in surprise, looking at the lacquered walnut box she was holding in her hands. She immediately realized that these were Army medals. They were reminiscent of the awards her Uncle Morris, which he proudly displayed at home. Darlene didn't understand why Alan hid them, because her uncle was always proud of his military awards. She pulled out a smaller box, which she set aside. Her eyebrow quivered when there was only one medal. The light reflected off a 5-pointed bronze star. Each corner of the star was decorated with a shamrock, and the entire star was surrounded by a green laurel wreath, symbolizing victory. The star and wreath were attached to a gold bar with the inscription Valor and held by an eagle, symbolizing the United States. In the center of the star was an image of the head of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and war. Darlene didn't know what the medal meant as she ran her fingers along the blue satin ribbon. Feeling the coldness of the medal, she noticed something engraved on the back. Her breath stopped when she read the inscription, "The Congress to Eric Lyle." "Your name is Eric Lyle?" Darlene muttered. "I'm Mrs. Eric Lyle." "Hello, yes, I'm Mrs. Lyle," she said, practicing what the new name would sound like. Closing the box and holding it to her chest, she smiled, realizing that she could get used to this name. "But why is your name Alan Douglas if you are Eric Lyle?" This question haunted her when she put the box aside and took the folders that she took out first. Her cheek twitches as she begins to open them one by one, finding them empty. Only the last folder contained documents. Her hand shook when she saw Eric's birth certificate. "Oh, honey," Darlene sighed softly, her eyes skimming over the document, which did not list either mother or father. She cried when she read that Eric had been adopted from an orphanage she had never heard of in a city she was unfamiliar with. "I'm so sorry, darling," she whispered in the empty room, clutching the document to her chest. "Is this why you changed your name?" Darlene continued to whisper, as if talking to herself. "Is this why you never told me about your life before we met? Because you yourself didn't know who you were." Her voice trembled as she carefully put the evidence back into the folder. She reached for the last document that remained in the safe, and her gaze caught the large heading, DD 214. "What is DD 214? She muttered, trying to understand the meaning of this mysterious document. Taking out her phone, she dialed the number of a person who she hoped could shed some light on her findings. At the same time, her gaze fell again on the medals lying in the box, and she felt her heart clench with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Hello?" The hoarse, slightly tired voice of her Aunt Greta was heard. "Hello, Aunt Greta. Tell me, is Uncle Morris at home? Isn't he too busy right now?" Darlene asked, her gaze returning to the document, which she nervously turned over in her hands, not understanding half of what was written. "Yes, he is at home. He sits and watches a match. You know how it is this time of year," Greta said with a slight grumble, but her voice sounded warm. "Should I call him?" "If it's not too much trouble for you," Darlene answered politely. "Of course, honey, it's not a problem. Wait a little." "Morris, Morris," Darlene heard her aunt calling her uncle, trying to wake him from his nap. "What?" came Morris's sleepy, dissatisfied voice. "Darlene is on the line, wants to talk to you." "About?" "Give it here." "Morris." Darlene heard her aunt playfully shush him. "What? You can't walk past me with such a gorgeous ass and expect me not to spank it? Behave yourself, you old rascal," Greta replied coquettishly as her voice gradually faded away. "Dar, is that you?" She finally heard her uncle's voice. "Yes, it's me, Uncle," Darlene answered, barely holding back a smile. She wondered if she and Alan would be the same in their old age. She really hoped so. "What do you need, honey?" "What is DD 214? Darlene asked, her voice filled with confusion. The uncle on the other end of the line laughed briefly. "This is a document about military service. Essentially, this is an extract about how a person was discharged from the army." "Why are you asking?" "I just came across something." Darlene hesitated. "Did you come across it?" Uncle's voice became suspicious. "Darlene, such documents don't just lie around." "What's happening?" "I think Alan was in the army." "But I'm not sure," she admitted, folding the document and placing it on top of the metal box. "If he has a DD 214, then he definitely served," Morris confirmed. "Could you help me figure out what I found?" "Of course, come. But why don't you just ask Alan himself? These are his documents." "Alan doesn't know I found them," Darlene admitted. "Darlene, it's not entirely right to delve into other people's things without their knowledge." There was a clear note of condemnation in Morris's voice. I know, Uncle, but I need to know, she said quietly. Okay, I'll help, but I will only explain what is stated in this document and nothing more. Clear? Morris was strict. Thank you, Uncle Morris. This is very important to me. I'll be with you in 20 minutes, Darlene said, getting to her feet. When they said goodbye, Darlene tucked her documents and medals under her arm, then headed out. She had no intention of closing the safe, at least not until she knew the meaning of everything she found. Darlene, where are you going and what do you have? Tracy asked, noticing her sister already standing in the doorway with her purse slung over her shoulder. I'm going to Uncle Morris and Aunt Greta. I'll be back soon. I'll tell you everything when I get back, Darlene replied, not paying attention to the fact that her hair and makeup were not in the best shape. Her thoughts were completely occupied with her husband's past. Wait, I'll go with you. Just let me turn off the TV, Tracy said, getting up from the couch. Well, Alan, if that's his real name, Morris began, looking at the DD-214 he held in his hands. He did serve in the army and was honorably discharged. His voice sounded with a note of approval. The rest here is after my time, so I cannot explain everything that is indicated here, he said, returning the document to his niece. Morris glanced at the box in her lap and noticed how Darlene was clutching it as if protecting her most valuable possession. Uncle, HM, he responded, looking away from the paper. Can you tell me what these medals mean? Darlene asked, handing him the box. Morris let out an admiring whistle as he carefully examined the rows of ribbons. Your husband is a very highly decorated soldier, he said proudly. Now wait a minute, let me remember, he continued, pointing to each tape in turn. This is Presidential Unit Citation, NATO Medal, Distinguished Service Order, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Medal, Purple Heart. Morris paused, then held his breath as his gaze fell on one particular ribbon. It was blue with 5 white stars. It was a ribbon for an order that he had only seen on posters in Army recruiting centers when he was still helping there. It was the Medal of Honor. Uncle, is something wrong? Darlene asked, noticing how he froze. Give it here, Morris demanded, pointing to the box. Oh, okay, Darlene said, feeling a little scared by his tone. Do you even understand what this is? He said with reverence, carefully taking the box in his hands and opening it to make sure once again. No, Darlene drawled, frowning slightly. That's why I came to you, Uncle. I have no idea what he did to deserve this, but your husband is a hero, Morris said, looking intently into his niece's eyes. Darlene and Tracy, standing nearby reading DD-214, exchanged stunned glances. This here, Morris continued, pointing to the blue ribbon, which he held so carefully as if it might break, is the Medal of Honor. This is the highest award in the Army. Respect it and the person who received it. Never lose it, he said with emphasized seriousness, closing the lid of the box and handing it to Darlene. Darlene nodded, clutching the box and medals to her chest as if they were priceless treasures. Her eyes sparkled with pride and confusion. Morris, aren't you boring the girls too much? Greta's voice rang out as she entered the room. God forbid, I'm just sharing a few words of wisdom with Darlene, Morris replied with a wide smile. Girls, do you want to stay for dinner? Greta asked, looking at Darlene and Tracy. We haven't eaten together for a long time, and it will be nice. Of course we will, Darlene said, and Tracy nodded in agreement. Why don't you put this in the car? Morris suggested, nodding at the medals and documents. Okay, I don't want to lose this, Darlene agreed, carefully taking the DD-214 from Tracy and walking out to her car. My Alan is a hero, she muttered in admiration and pride, heading towards the car. My own hero. Darlene could hardly contain her laughter with joy, carefully putting everything into the trunk. She didn't understand why Alan hid all this. Why wasn't he proud of what he achieved? Perhaps he just wanted to forget what happened or didn't think he deserved the honor. Darlene didn't know and didn't want to push him. She had a good man, a warm home, and a stable marriage. Nothing can take this away, she sighed happily, closing the trunk. Darlene carefully closed the trunk and, running her hand over a small dent on the side of the car, felt a strange mixture of relief and pride flowing through her soul. It seemed to her that now she knew at least a little more about her husband. Medal of Honor. What is he really like? She thought as she returned to the house of Uncle Morris and Aunt Greta. My heart fluttered at the thought that Alan or Eric had once done something so outstanding that he received the highest US military award. She so wanted to be proud of her husband openly, but she understood that he himself was either ashamed or kept it a deep secret for some reason. When Darlene returned to the living room, Tracy was already helping Greta set the table, and Morris turned the TV down from the sports channel to the local news. Well, did Uncle explain everything? Tracy asked, noticing how her sister's eyes were slightly red, either from excitement or tears. Yes, he confirmed that Alan was a military man and was honorably discharged, and he also said that one of his awards is the Medal of Honor. Darlene barely uttered the last words, as if she herself did not believe what she heard. Tracy opened her mouth. Medal of Honor? Are you kidding? I wish I could, Darlene sighed. I never knew he deserved it. Amazing, Tracy said quietly, with genuine pride in her voice. Maybe he really is a hero. It's a shame he can't be openly proud of it. Maybe someday he'll tell me. Darlene whispered, lowering her head. She felt a new feeling flaring up inside, a mixture of guilt for her behavior and admiration for her husband, whom she truly loved, even if she did not know how to be faithful. Girls, Greta interrupted them, waving her hand. Save the salad from Morris. He started eating straight from the bowl again. Together they laughed, and the tension that had hung in the air for a while dissipated. They sat down to dinner. The usual family chatter, quiet music in the background, and the noise of the TV allowed Darlene to escape from difficult thoughts, at least for a while. At the table, Greta smiled at her nieces, remembering how long it had been since she had seen both sisters sitting side by side without mutual reproaches and insults. Even Tracy seemed to soften. Apparently, the secrets associated with Alan outweighed her own scores with Darlene. If only they knew how much more complicated everything is. When Darlene and Tracy returned home late that evening, the kitchen clock showed about 10 o'clock in the evening. It was almost dark outside. Tracy yawned for a long time, tired after the journey and emotional stress. I think I'll go to bed, she muttered, losing her eyes. What are you going to do? Darlene fell silent for a moment, looking at the dark corridor leading to her husband's office. I'll put the medals and documents back so Alan won't notice that we took them. Fine. Try not to linger. I feel uneasy when there is little light in the house, Tracy admitted, remembering the broken door in her apartment and the recent fight with Nate. Darlene nodded and went into the office. There she found the safe ajar, remembering that she herself had left it wide open. The folders were in their place, but it was as if someone had moved them. Darlene's heart began to pound. Had Alan really returned? But she didn't hear the door open and his car wasn't in the driveway. I must have put it the wrong way, she decided. But deep down, something told me that someone had already been here. Placing the medals, DD 214, and birth certificate in the same order, she closed the safe and turned the code dial. I looked around carefully. Nothing was visible, nothing was heard. Maybe it's just my nerves, she sighed, turning off the light. Leaving the office, she saw that Tracy had already gone to her room and turned off the light. There was complete silence in the house, only the slight rustle of the wind outside the windows. Darlene walked decisively into the living room to call Alan. She promised to contact him after 8. But as soon as she picked up the phone, a shiver ran through her body. His name appeared on the screen, or rather, Alan. She nervously ran her tongue over her lips and replied, Hi, darling. Hello, Dee. He paused, seemingly intending to call her a diminutive, but changed his mind. How are you? Miss you. Is the work already finished? No, it's more complicated than I thought. The boss asks me to stay another day or two, but I'll try to be back by Monday evening. Darlene clutched the pillow next to her on the couch, as if seeking comfort in it. I understand. You know, I visited Uncle Morris today. There was a tense silence on the phone. Why? Yes, so. Darlene bit her lip, not knowing how to admit that she found his medals and documents. I decided to visit my relatives, and at the same time ask my uncle something about military service. Well, out of curiosity, she said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. Military service? Alan's voice became noticeably colder. I hope he didn't bore you with stories about how hard it was in the army. No, he didn't go deeper, Darlene lied. I just mentioned that not everyone can even come close to such awards as. She stopped short, almost blurting out about the Medal of Honor. I see, Alan responded briefly. I have to go, Dar. We'll contact you later. Everything is fine. Yes, okay, she said, a little upset. I love you, remember that. Me too. My heart burned with slight sadness when the telephone beep announced the disconnection. He didn't say, I love you, she thought, peering at the screen. Of course, they had problems, but she always hoped that he loved her, no matter what. Alan shrugged his shoulders nervously, feeling the collar of his shirt pressing on his neck. He was sitting in a small bistro opposite the building where the office to which Agent Maria Acharya had been invited was located. Her flight from Rome had landed the night before, and she was scheduled to report today. While he was pretending to be a client who had dropped in by chance in order to try to, accidentally, cross paths with her after the briefing. His thoughts returned to his conversation with Darlene. She mentioned a visit to Uncle Morris, and also that she was interested in military service. Did she really guess? Alan thought, taking a sip of bitter coffee. He himself wondered why he was still so clinging to this life. After all, he could have left as soon as he received permission from the agency to more or less quietly settle down. But leaving would mean losing the social cover that is ideal for a spy and does not arouse suspicion. And he got used to this woman, and for some reason he didn't want to leave her. It's strange because I hate betrayal, he thought, watching people appear at the entrance to the office at the other end of the street. The first to come out was a man in a gray suit, then a woman with dark hair tied up in a bun. But it wasn't Maria. A few more people, all in business style. She should be out later, Alan concluded as he ordered a second cup of coffee. He waited patiently. An hour later, he finally saw a familiar slender figure in a black business suit and white blouse. Maria took a couple of steps along the sidewalk, then checked her phone, looked around, noticed it, and suddenly stopped. A whole range of emotions was reflected on her face, from surprise and joy to anxiety. Thank God, Maria thought when she saw him. So he's here. I hope there are no traps. Grinning, she crossed the road and entered the bistro. Alan stood up, motioning her to an empty chair across from him. Hello, Eric, she addressed him by her real name, lowering her voice. Maria, he nodded slightly. How's the flight? Tiring, she shrugged. The transatlantic is always exhausting, and I expected that there would be fewer bureaucratic issues here, but I was dragged around the offices for half a day. I understand. Alan leaned closer. I'm glad to see you. Maria narrowed her eyes, but a smile touched her lips. I'm glad too, Eric. I would never have thought that we would meet in such an environment, like two old friends. How is your family life? Alan hesitated. It's going to take longer to tell than I'd like. Let me say briefly, she still changes men, but oddly enough, I don't care. I guess I just wanted to have something in this life, even if it wasn't real. Maria understood. They both saw a lot and experienced a lot. However, the words, not real, stung her painfully. But she loved Eric from the day he saved her life by taking bullets intended for her. And she knew that no man in her past operations had managed to touch her heart the way he did. You know, fake sometimes develops into something more. You should be more careful, Maria said quietly. I'm already starting to understand this, Alan sighed. But we have more important things to do. I need to check something about you, Maria. Yeah, I heard about the suspicions, she frowned. They think that I work for the enemy, that I sold our data to the Libyans, that I set us all up. Absurd. I want to believe you, Alan admitted. But orders are orders. I am obliged to find out if you are involved. If it turns out that yes, I myself know what I will be forced to do." Maria lowered her eyes. "I understand. We are both, after all, mercenaries of the government, which will dispose of us whenever it sees fit. But Eric, believe me, it's not true. I'm not a traitor. If necessary, I will find evidence." His gaze warmed for a second. He wanted to trust her. But the agent's instinct was to remain on guard. "Fine. Let's do this. I know people who can check any of our activities. If it was one of ours who leaked the data, we will find a trace. Do you have copies of the reports or access to those sent to the center?" Maria nodded. "I still have the encrypted ones. If your access is higher, we can compare the data and show the authorities that I am clean." They agreed to meet every other day at a designated place to check everything. When Maria stood up and was about to leave, her fingers lingered on his wrist. "Thank you for deciding to figure it out and not shoot to kill." "I'm not a monster," Alan said, slightly embarrassed. She smiled. "I know. Take care of yourself." He watched her leave, wondering how much was at stake. If Maria is innocent, then there is another agent whose betrayal split their operation in Libya. But he didn't have any leads yet, and his wife was waiting at home, who herself, perhaps, began to investigate his past. The next day, Darlene woke up with a heavy head, having slept a little longer than usual. Tracy was already busy in the kitchen, making coffee and, judging by the smell, bacon sandwiches. "Good morning, walking sister," she said without malice, rather mechanically. "I don't have the energy for your jokes anymore," Darlene muttered, yawning. "Any more news?" "Yes, it turned out just funny. Do you remember I went to see a police officer I knew, Harry?" "Certainly. He began to open the safe and, remember, everything was blocked when he tried to check Alan's name." "And what?" "Harry called this morning. He said that someone who introduced himself as our relative tried to gain access to materials on you and on Alan, but he didn't give anything away." "Our relatives?" Darlene was surprised. "What nonsense. We have a limited circle of relatives, and no one else knows about my affairs with Harry." Both thoughts. Taking a quick glance out the window, Tracy bit her lip. "It's all strange. Maybe someone is watching our movements." "Perhaps," Darlene nodded, reluctantly taking a bite of her sandwich. There was no appetite. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. The number was unidentified, but the voice on the phone seemed vaguely familiar to her. "Hello, beauty. Do you remember me?" "Who is this?" she asked coldly. "Come on, Dar. We've already met." "Well, you called me not the best, remember?" Darlene went cold. It was Roger, the same man from the bar, with whom she had a fleeting, intimate meeting. "Where did you get my number?" she hissed, feeling the blood rushing to her cheeks. "We found mutual acquaintances," Roger answered vaguely. "I miss our night. Maybe we can repeat it. I'm busy, and I don't want to discuss this at all." Tracy stood nearby, listening to snatches of the conversation, seeing her sister's face change. "Oh, are you really cooling down so quickly? Listen, I have something that might interest you. It wasn't just that you asked me about my hotel then, right? I'm not a fool, Dar, and I know you're looking for something about your husband, and I have information." "Information." Darlene's heart trembled. "Why do you think I would be interested in this? Because you've been with him for 3 years and still don't know anything about him. Isn't that right?" Roger laughed sarcastically. "Leave me alone," she muttered through clenched teeth. "Then maybe your sister would like to know the truth." "Oh yes, I know about your sister, and about her recent problems with her fiancé. Remember, I know how to find out what I need." Darlene looked at Tracy for support. The sister nodded, as if to say, "Find out what he wants." "What do you want, Roger?" "Meeting. Night bar, Silver Moon today at 10 o'clock in the evening. If you're alone, without your sister, we'll make an agreement. Otherwise, I will make sure that someone else knows about your adventures and more." A sharp squeak interrupted the conversation. He hung up. Darlene clutched the phone tightly, feeling her hands shake. She was furious and panicked. "What's happened?" Tracy asked, starting to worry. This guy, Roger. Remember what I said? I met at a bar. It seems he has information about Alan. He wants to meet today at 10 at the Silver Moon, and he threatens that if I don't come, he will tell everything. I don't know to whom. Maybe he doesn't have anything, Tracy reasoned, but he's just blackmailing you to get you into bed again. Maybe. But what if he really has information? Darlene's heart sank. On the one hand, she was afraid of a trap. On the other, the desire to find out the truth about her husband was overwhelming. I'll go with you, Tracy said firmly. But he said without his sister, fuck it, I'll wait in the car. If anything happens, I'll come to help. I've had enough of situations where someone broke into my apartment, beat me up, and I was left without cover. At least I'll be on my guard. Darlene wanted to object, but she knew she was scared alone. She needed support, even from her sister, with whom she was always at odds. Okay, just promise me you won't interfere until I tell you to. I promise. In the evening, when it was getting dark outside, the sisters went to the Silver Moon bar. He was in a dubious area, sparse streetlights, broken glass windows, and suspicious characters in the alleys. Tracy grabbed the steering wheel, trying not to show fear. If anything happens, call me. I'll be here, she said as Darlene got out of the car. Okay, she answered quietly, feeling her heart pounding. The bar inside turned out to be gloomy. Black walls, dim light, the smell of fumes and smoke. Roger was sitting in the far corner. He immediately stood up when he saw her. With one hand, he pulled an empty chair towards him. Sit down, beauty. Darlene sighed heavily and sat down opposite him, trying to remain confident. Well, what do you need? Roger smiled, taking a sip from his glass of whiskey. You look good. You know, today you're more nervous than before. Roger, I don't intend to waste my time. You said that you have some information about my husband. Yes, but let's discuss the conditions first. You love a deal, don't you? He leaned closer. His voice sounded even, but his eyes burned with a strange fire. I need money, and not small ones. And then I will share what I know about your dear Alan. Money? How many? $50,000. Darlene whistled softly. 50,000 is too much for her. The account Alan opened in her name would not have allowed such a sum to be withdrawn without his knowledge. This is crazy. Why did you suddenly decide that I can afford to shell out 50,000? You're his wife, Roger shrugged. I'm sure he has savings. I checked some accounts your husband is clearly involved with. Interesting people. I think you can handle it. I won't steal from my own husband. You don't have to steal. Just persuade him to make a large transfer. Say, for example, that your sister is sick, or that you want to buy a house for your parents. Or, be a little more creative. Roger chuckled. And what will I learn in return? For starters, his real name. Isn't it strange that you've been together for 3 years and he's Alan Douglas? After all, there is a man named Eric Lyle who is very similar to your husband. Can't you guess? Darlene pursed her lips, trying to hide the fact that she already knew. Let's say. Further, I'll tell you what he did in Afghanistan, Iraq, and some other places. I'll tell you how he became a hero and what really happened. And most importantly, why is there a reward on his head? Roger paused for a second, savoring Darlene's reaction. Reward? She couldn't resist, realizing that we could be talking about something truly dangerous. Oh yes, your husband, my dear, is no ordinary soldier. He is the one who blew the brains out of terrorists. And not only them. In some countries, he is considered a war criminal. In others, he is praised as a hero. It depends from which side you look. I don't believe you, Darlene hissed, although she was already trembling inside. It's your right, but I don't have to tell. Or, if you want, you can try to take my files and evidence from me by force. Roger raised an eyebrow mockingly. I don't recommend it. And how do I know that you are not lying? I'll give you a small sample. For example, I'll show you a photo of him, still young, in uniform, with someone from the command. Some documents. Show me, Darlene demanded. Money first, Roger snapped. Otherwise, He didn't finish because the bar door opened with a bang and a large man in a long cloak entered the room. His eyes immediately fell on Roger and Darlene, and the next moment he walked towards them. "Did you say something about money in advance?" A deep voice rang out. Roger jumped up, jerking to his belt, where he probably had a gun. But the man was faster. The blade flashed, and before Roger could draw the weapon, his hand was pressed to the table with painful force. "My organization is unhappy with the way you are stalling for time, Goodell," the stranger hissed with a clear accent. "You promised to deal with Lyle and bring his wife and sister to us. And you're still chatting here. Shut up." Roger tried to wriggle out. "Not here, idiot. Security," one of the visitors shouted, seeing that a fight was starting. Everything around was in motion. Darlene jumped back, putting her hand to her lips, scared half to death. The mention of her and her sister was direct evidence that Roger was planning something much more terrible than just blackmail. At that moment, several big men from the bar security flew up to their table, trying to break up the fight. The man in the raincoat released Roger, retreated to the door, and blurted out, "You have 2 days, Goodell. 2 days, otherwise our boss will find you himself, and no one will save you." He disappeared before the guards really understood what had happened. Roger, breathing heavily, turned to Darlene. "Damn," he cursed, straightening up. "Okay, let's forget about 50,000. Now I need another option. You will come with me right now, and together we will find Alan. That is, Eric," he spat. "Otherwise, believe me, it will be worse." "No way," Darlene felt her legs shaking, but tried to keep her voice firm. "Listen to me, fool. These people are not joking. They are involved in trafficking in people, weapons, and other things. They need Eric to get revenge for something in the past. But the easiest way to find out where he is through you. If you don't agree to cooperate with me, they will simply kidnap you and your sister and force you to speak by force. Get away from me," Darlene screamed as he grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her away from the table. At this moment, the guards were already approaching. Roger had to let her go, and he grabbed his jacket and ran to the exit. "It's okay, I'll find you again," he finally shouted and disappeared out the door. Stunned, Darlene ran out into the street after him, but there was no trace of him. A second later, Tracy ran up to her. "I saw some guy rush away, and you. God, are you okay?" There. Roger, he. Darlene couldn't gather her thoughts. "It seems like we're in for something truly terrible." A few days later, Alan was still in Washington, trying, together with Maria, to understand who leaked their Libyan operation. Every day, he became more and more convinced that Maria was not guilty. No matter what checks were carried out, all the evidence pointed to her innocence. But if not her, then who? In the evening, when they were looking through encrypted data in a secret room, Maria suddenly gasped. "Look at this. Here is information about 2 of our former colleagues who went missing after London." Alan frowned, remembering how he was wounded when one of them suddenly opened fire. "Jacob Train and Roger Goodell," he read, and his heart skipped a beat. "Roger, do you recognize it?" Maria asked, noticing how Eric's face had turned pale. "Yes, we worked together in the same department. But in the end, he sold our group to the enemies, and when I discovered this, he tried to bribe me. I refused and shot. I thought I killed him." Maria shook her head doubtfully. "It turns out he is alive. And judging by the records, he collaborated with many criminal organizations. Now it's clear who could have given our information to the Libyans. But why? He must have held a grudge against me because I didn't make the deal. And then I decided to spite him," Alan said bitterly. "In that case, he can look for me through my family." The thought of this made his heart clench. After all, if Roger finds out about Darlene, he will try to get to him, using her as bait. But she knows nothing about his real life. Alan frantically found his phone and looked at the screen, checking his messages. None from Darlene. Either she didn't want to call him, or something happened. He tried to call her himself, but heard only short beeps. "Damn it," he swore. "Maria, I need to return as soon as possible." "I understand. The agency may not give you this opportunity. They haven't completely removed suspicions from me yet, and they may ask you to stay. To hell with it. If Roger is in on it, my wife is in danger. And if something happens to her. He stopped short, not wanting to admit even to himself how worried he was. Maria put her hand on his shoulder. Go. I'll cover you here. I'll say that I need time to prepare reports, and you need time to go on a business trip. Thank you. I will have to. A couple of hours later, Alan was already driving a rented car towards his home, filled with gloomy forebodings. 2 days passed in anxiety for Darlene and Tracy. They had no idea how to protect themselves from a possible attack. They were afraid to contact the police, who would believe them that some international bandits were hunting them, or perhaps the government is also involved. After all, Alan's name is well covered. We need to go somewhere until Alan returns, Tracy suggested one evening, locking herself and her sister in the living room. For example, to parents. But they themselves are having a hard time making ends meet, and it's not safe for us there either. If these people are really such professionals. Darlene objected, biting her nails with nervousness. A crash outside the door made them both jump. Tracy immediately rushed to the window, looking out through the gap in the curtain. A black van. Someone got out. Oh damn, there are 3 of them. The women looked at each other. Darlene immediately grabbed the phone and tried to dial 911, but the connection suddenly disappeared, as if someone was jamming the signal. Go through the back door, she shouted to Tracy, the first to rush into the depths of the house. But before they could get there, they heard the sound of the door breaking. 3 armed men appeared in the living room and quickly looked around. One noticed female silhouettes in the corridor and shouted, "Stop!" The sisters ran. Tracy managed to grab a vase and threw it at one of the men, but he dodged and immediately pointed a gun at her. "One more step and you're dead," he hissed. Darlene froze as she saw the bandit's hand clutching a weapon pointed at her sister. The second bandit grabbed Darlene by the hair, tearing the phone out of her hands and throwing it to the floor. "Let's go without nonsense, lady. We just want to talk." "Yes, talk, and take us to the boss, right?" Tracy muttered gloomily, without resisting. She saw that any movement could cost them their lives. They were dragged towards the exit, where a black van was waiting. Tracy wanted to scream, but the third man hit her in the side with the butt of a pistol, and she hissed in pain. "Quiet, otherwise I'll shoot you on the spot," he muttered. As they were pushed inside, one thought was running through Darlene's head. "Alan, where are you?" Alan sped down the highway, trying not to speed enough to get stopped by the police, but not to waste a second. He could feel in his skin that Roger would not sit idle. "If he's alive, he'll find my home sooner or later," Alan thought, clenching the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The time was approaching evening, and the road seemed endless. Finally, having entered his city, the first thing he did was turn towards the house. There was no one at the entrance, only silence and the broken front door. His heart sank anxiously. He took the gun out of the glove compartment and rushed inside. Silence, emptiness, traces of a struggle in the living room, fragments of a vase, a broken telephone. "Crap," Alan whispered. "They already took her." In a couple of minutes, he looked around all the rooms, trying to find at least some clue. Finally, he noticed a crumpled pack of cigarettes on the floor that clearly did not belong to either Darlene or Tracy. He picked it up. On the back, he could see a handwritten inscription. "Old Warehouse, HWI 19. "Thank you, dear," he breathed, guessing that perhaps the sisters or one of them had managed to leave him a hint. Or the bandits themselves did it to lure him into a trap. But he had no options left. He ran back to the car, dialing the number of one of his agency acquaintances as he went. He did not answer, and Alan only cursed, realizing that he would have to act alone. The warehouse on Route 19 was a sprawling structure of rusting iron and concrete, with broken windows and rickety gates. The place was ideal for illegal transactions and other shady activities. It was dark inside, lit only by a few lamps on the ceiling. At the far shelf stood a group of people, among whom was Roger. He watched as two of his henchmen tied up Tracy and Darlene, sitting them on the floor and gagging their mouths. "Well, ladies," Roger said, almost friendly, "everything could be easier, but you are stubborn." Tracy looked at him angrily, mentally cursing both herself and fate. Darlene tried to scream, but the gag was in the way, and only muffled sounds came out. At that moment, a rustling sound was heard at the entrance. Roger raised his hand, ordering his assistants to freeze. Taking out a pistol, he made a sign, "Scatter." Alan crept inside, trying to stay behind the boxes, waiting for the right moment. It was clear to him that there were at least 4 enemies here. "We must act carefully," he told himself, feeling an icy rage inside. They dared to kidnap his wife and her sister. One of the bandits, walking in circles, suddenly noticed a shadow sliding between the boxes and fired a warning shot. The bullet ricocheted off the metal surface with a booming sound. "You could at least say hello, Eric," Roger shouted loudly. "Or do you prefer the name Alan now?" Alan sighed, realizing that it wouldn't be possible to get close secretly. He took a quick look at the bound Darlene and saw tears running down her cheeks. He couldn't shoot at random, it might accidentally hit the sisters. "Roger, let them go," he shouted, hiding behind a stack of iron barrels. "No way, you must pay for what you did in London," came the answer. "But maybe we can come to an agreement. You give up, and I let them live." "Yeah, right, and then sell them to someone," Alan muttered. "This won't happen." Roger laughed mockingly. "Okay, you can try to shoot us all, like then. Just don't miss, or you'll hit your little wife." Under the cover of the boxes, Alan advanced, trying to assess the enemy's positions. He remembered every step, every breath. He had many such situations in special operations. One of the bandits approached him from the side, and Alan silently rushed forward, hitting his enemy in the neck with his pistol. He collapsed without a sound. Noticing that one was missing, Roger hissed, "Check the left lane, fast." 2 more moved there. Alan understood that time was short. The sisters were hostages. If there was an active shooter, Darlene and Tracy could get hurt. It was necessary to find a way to quickly neutralize everyone. Then he noticed something in a half-open box that could help several smoke bombs. Apparently, decommissioned military materials were stored in the warehouse. Carefully, trying not to make noise, Alan took out one, pulled out the pin, and threw it deep into the room. A second later, thick smoke began to fill the space, enveloping everything around. Roger and his men began to rush about. What they do not shoot without an order. Alan took advantage of the moment. 2 quick bursts, and both of Roger's henchmen fell to the floor, writhing from being hit in their legs and arms. He shot accurately, trying not to kill, but to neutralize. "Bastard," Roger shouted, hiding behind a massive shelving unit. "I knew this would happen, but you won't make it out alive." Alan saw Roger's silhouette through the smoke. But what was even more important was that Tracy and Darlene were sitting just a few meters away. He crawled towards them, retreating into the smoke, grabbed Tracy by the hand, and, trying to act quickly, cut the ties with a knife. She pulled back her hands, tore off the gag, and, almost crying, whispered, "There's another one." Alan nodded, turning his attention to Darlene, untying her too. But suddenly, a shot was heard from behind. Turning around, Alan saw how one of the wounded bandits was still able to raise his weapon. "I had to respond immediately. The bullet hit the enemy in the shoulder, knocking the pistol out of his hands." "Let's run to the exit," Alan commanded, lifting Darlene to her feet. Tracy, overcoming pain and fear, helped her sister. Both were hobbling. They sat tied up for a long time. Their legs were numb. But the smoke was already beginning to clear, and Roger, taking advantage of the moment, rushed towards the boxes of weapons. In one motion, he grabbed the machine gun and rolled behind cover. "Don't move!" He barked and fired a burst along the wall above the heads of the fugitives. The bullets struck sparks from the iron sheets. Alan realized that there was little chance in open battle. Roger had a machine gun, and the two bandits were probably still capable of shooting. But we need to buy time for the sisters to escape. Tracy, that door on the right, see? Run there and don't look back, he whispered, feeling his heart literally beating the rhythm of panic and adrenaline. I'll cover it. The women looked at each other, then Darlene, looking into her husband's eyes, suddenly pressed herself close to him. Please don't die. I won't survive this. Alan nodded briefly, touching her cheek. I'm not going to, honey. Go. As the sisters rushed towards the door, Alan rolled to the left and returned fire at Roger. He crouched down, hiding behind a metal panel. Hey, Lyle, Roger yelled. You think if you save them, it's all over? I will find you anyway. And your grandma, too. Alan didn't answer. He knew Roger was too dangerous to be left alive, but killing his former colleague was the last thing he wanted. However, there was no choice if he did not give up on himself. It was too similar to memories from the past betrayal, everything that he tried to forget. Tracy and Darlene had already emerged from the warehouse and staggered to a roadside wasteland. Tracy tried to find her phone in her pocket, thank God. Her cell phone was still with her and hadn't been taken. She called 911 and reported the attack and the location. Then she dialed Harry from the police, hoping for a faster response. Alan caught up with them a couple of minutes later, all disheveled, with clothes stained with blood and dust. Are you alive? He asked, approaching them, and noticed how Darlene rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Yes, Lord, thank you, she cried. I was so afraid that they would kill you. He was breathing heavily. We need to leave here. The police will arrive now, and I don't want any unnecessary questions. Tracy, taking a deep breath, nodded. Yes. We said that a gang attacked us, and they shot each other. Let's try to avoid details. Okay, let's go to my car. When all three, limping and trembling from tension, reached Alan's car. We're going to the Sunset Motel on the outskirts. I'll rent a room there, and then we'll decide what to do. Almost no one spoke the entire way. The silence, filled with thoughts of how they almost died, seemed ominous. Finally, Alan stopped at a small motel with a neon sign. I'll take one room, he turned to the administrator, handing over more cash. We need 2 beds and a minimum of questions. Of course, the man smiled knowingly. The room was clean but modest. 1 window, 2 beds, a small table, and a TV. The light from the lamp was dim. Alan sat down on one of the beds, putting his head in his hands. Tracy and Darlene settled on the other, huddled together. For some time, no one said a word. Maybe someone can explain what's going on. Tracy finally spoke, breaking the silence. Who were those people? Alan raised his gaze, showing weariness and the heaviness of the past years. They're Roger Goodell's people. He was my colleague once, but betrayed us. Looks like he got involved with a major criminal organization, and they've wanted me dead for a long time. And you, Darlene swallowed. You're not just a banker, right? You're a soldier. Uncle Morris told me, you're not even a private, you're a hero. Alan smiled bitterly. As for hero, that's debatable. Sometimes the difference between a hero and a killer is only who writes the story. I was Special Forces, completed many missions, not all of them pure or noble. Then I was recruited by the CIA. The CIA? Tracy exclaimed. So all those business trips, client deals were a cover, Alan answered. I married Darlene partly for that cover too. I needed to seem like an ordinary family man. Darlene's heart ached at those words. That's why he never resisted her advances, he simply didn't care. He paused before continuing. But over time, I really got used to you, Dar, even though you slept with others. Tracy snorted, but had some sympathy in her eyes. So what now? How can we continue to live? We were almost killed today because of your secrets, she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Alan closed his eyes. I understand that I got you into this. Roger isn't the only threat. One of his other patrons might try to finish what he started. But I will do everything to protect you. How? Darlene asked, peering hungrily at her husband. First of all, I'll contact the agency. I have the right connections. We will get protection for both of you. Or, you will leave under a new identity if it is very dangerous. Tears quietly flowed down Darlene's cheeks. A new identity? So, we'll have to forget all our friends and relatives. Maybe, but it's better than dying. He fell silent when he saw Tracy biting her lip as she got out of bed. Sorry, I'll go out for a minute. I need some fresh air. She slipped into the hallway, leaving Darlene and Alan alone. Darlene hesitantly approached her husband and knelt before him. Alan or Eric? Can I call you Eric? He hesitated and nodded. Of course, that's my real name, though I haven't heard it from loved ones in a long time. She took his hands. You know, I saw your medals. You deserve them, but why keep everything a secret? There's too much pain in my service. I lost friends, got my hands dirty following orders. Medals, just a sign that I killed well. Darlene shook her head. No, dear, Uncle Morris said the Medal of Honor isn't given out for nothing. You saved lives, you risked yourself. Yes, you could have died, but you did it to protect others. He turned away, hiding the sudden moisture in his eyes. Thank you. I love you, Eric, and forgive me for all the betrayals. I know you said you didn't care, but I feel guilty. He gently stroked her hair. Maybe we can start over, if, of course, we survive this. Let's start, Darlene whispered, pressing against his chest. I promise. The morning was cloudy. Rain drummed against the hotel window. Tracy, stepping out of the shower, carefully hid her bruises under her clothes. Darlene fiddled with the coffee maker while Alan went outside to make a call. Do you want to protect your wife and her sister? The boss asked with irony. Douglas, do you understand this wasn't part of the cover plan? I understand, sir, but the situation has changed. Roger Goodell is dead, but his employers might continue the hunt. The agency can't openly protect civilians without special reasons, the chief sighed. But fine, we can register them in the Witness Protection Program. I'll ask the FBI, we have the contacts. Thank you. I need them safe. Alan hung up, inhaling the damp morning air. His life would never return to its former calm. But maybe that was for the better. Back in the room, he found Tracy staring out the window, lost in thought. Tracy, he called. She turned. Yes? Alan wanted to thank her for staying with Darlene, keeping her from breaking down. But the words stuck in his throat. He noticed how tense she looked. Listen, Tracy began. I wanted to apologize for that experiment of ours. Well, you remember, it was awful of me. Alan felt uneasy, recalling how Tracy had blackmailed Darlene into sleeping with him just to spite her sister. He had given in without emotion. I don't hold a grudge, he said quietly. We all have our sins. That's life. Tracy let out a soft, bitter laugh. Yeah, it just makes me feel even more stupid. All because I hated my sister. But I could have lost her forever. Alan nodded. I think you still have time to forgive each other. At that moment, the door burst open and Darlene ran in, clutching her phone. Alan, Aunt Greta just called. Some strange people came asking where we were, but my uncle said he didn't know. Damn, Alan cursed. So they're not backing down. It's either what's left of the gang or a rival group. We need to leave immediately. Where? Tracy asked, fear in her voice. I have the address of a CIA safe house for witness protection. We'll stay there until further orders. The safe house was deep in the countryside, far from major cities. A small cottage, surrounded by dense forest, served as a refuge for agents and high-value witnesses. Alan had access to the keys and alarm codes. The sisters stepped out of the car, looking around. Silence. A rickety fence. Weeds lining the path. But inside was surprisingly clean, simple furniture, a stocked pantry, and a generator. There's no internet here, Alan warned. only a landline phone with a secure line. So forget about social media. Okay, we'll endure it, Tracy smiled bitterly. When the luggage was brought in and the doors were locked, all three tiredly collapsed on the sofas in the living room. The silence lasted a minute or two, interrupted by the sounds of the forest outside the windows. So, what's next? Darlene finally asked. We are waiting for them to inform me that they are officially launching a protection program for you. Then you will have new documents. You will move to another state. And you? Tracy raised an eyebrow. Are you really going to be left alone? Alan looked at his wife, then answered heavily. I will most likely be sent to the field again if it is confirmed that Maria is clean. A new operation will begin. But if Darlene wishes, I can leave the agency. Leave? Is this possible? Darlene jumped up. Not always, but I have a lot of condemned contracts, so I'll take a risk. He stood up and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. Tracy shrugged her shoulders and went to look around the house, leaving the two of them alone. Darlene followed her husband. Eric, she called quietly, are you really ready to give up everything for me? If this means that we can live together without enemies behind our backs, then yes, but I understand that you don't have to want it. I left you in deception 3 years ago, and I've been lying to you all this time, Darlene retorted. We're even. They looked at each other. Sparks of the same passionate attraction seemed to flash between them as in the first months of their marriage. Maybe everything will be fine, she whispered, clinging to him. I hope so, Alan replied. A week had passed. No one had appeared at the cottage door, and the phone remained silent, apparently, by Alan's superior's orders. No contact had been established yet. On one hand, the calm was reassuring. On the other, the waiting brought growing anxiety. The sisters' relationship gradually improved. They no longer brought up past grievances and tried to be polite to each other. Alan found a strange but pleasant peace in this. For the first time, he felt like part of a real family, flawed but real. One evening, after Tracy had gone to her room to rest, Alan and Darlene remained in the living room, listening to the crackling fire. Darlene leaned against him, tracing soft patterns on his arm. Do you want to talk? She asked gently, noticing his tension. I'm worried about why they're silent. Maybe something's wrong at the agency. Maybe we've been betrayed again. I don't know. Maybe they're just preparing our documents, Darlene suggested. Either way, as long as we're safe here, let's just be husband and wife for a while, without worries. Alan smiled and pulled her closer. When their lips met, the whole world seemed to disappear. Then footsteps echoed from the porch. Both instantly tensed. Alan signaled for Darlene to stay back, pulled his gun from its holster, and approached the door. Peering through the curtain, he saw a woman standing outside. Maria, he said, opening the door and letting her inside. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, she said breathlessly, stepping in. I had to avoid surveillance. Alan frowned. What happened? Why are you here? Maria glanced around, noticing Darlene, and nodded in greeting. It seems your agency has decided to write off both you and me. She pulled out a folder. I found documents stating we're officially liquidated as potential security threats. Damn, Alan whispered. He knew this sometimes happened. Agents who became liabilities were quietly surrendered or eliminated. Are you sure? Absolutely. She opened the folder, revealing classified documents. Here's the order. I managed to pull a copy. Darlene watched the conversation, not understanding all the details but recognizing the despair flashing in Alan's eyes. So, the protection program for me and my sister. There won't be one, Maria confirmed. They said you overstepped your authority and became too independent. They have no right, he snapped. The agency does what it wants. It's a government operation, Alan, or rather, Eric. They have all the authority and power they need. Then we have to leave, go into hiding before they decide to eliminate us, he said grimly. Darlene gripped his hand. We'll run, right? But how? I have contacts in Mexico. They can help us cross the border and create new identities, Alan said thoughtfully. But we'll need money. That's not a problem, Maria interjected. I have a Swiss account. I managed to save some funds. I'll help as long as we make it out alive. Wait, Darlene said warily, eyeing Maria with a hint of jealousy. Are you coming with us? Maria hesitated. If you don't mind, I was also sentenced. There's no point in running alone, it'll be harder to survive. Alan glanced at his wife, then nodded. She's right, it'll be easier for four. They briefly explained the situation to Tracy, who was initially frustrated about an unfamiliar woman joining them. But after learning that Maria was Alan's partner and also in mortal danger, she accepted it. Okay, let's do it. But how fast can we leave? Tomorrow. We gather what we need and leave early. We'll take Maria's car, her plates are clean, Alan said. The morning was surprisingly clear. After loading several bags into the trunk, all four squeezed into Maria's SUV. She drove with confidence while Alan kept a close eye on the mirrors. Darlene and Tracy sat in the back, trying not to let their nerves show. The plan was to reach a remote border crossing where Alan's smugglers would help them cross undetected. Then they would head deeper into Mexico and secure new identities through Maria's contacts. How far is it? Tracy asked after an hour on the deserted highway. About 3 hours, Alan answered. Hang on. But half an hour later, he spotted a black SUV in the mirror speeding up behind them. Looks like we have a tail, Alan said grimly. Maria stepped on the gas, trying to widen the gap, but the pursuers also accelerated. The sisters exchanged nervous glances. The engine roared as Maria pushed the car faster, but the road grew rougher. Behind them, flashing lights appeared, possibly government agents. They're gaining on us, Darlene whispered, gripping Tracy's hand. Stay calm, Alan ordered. Maria, take the dirt road. The SUV swerved, kicking up a cloud of dust. The pursuers followed. The chase veered into rough desert terrain, both vehicles bouncing over the uneven road. Maria gritted her teeth, keeping control. There's an old canyon on the left, Alan shouted. Head there, we might lose them. They swerved into a narrow gorge between rock walls. The black SUV followed. Get out, Alan commanded as Maria suddenly braked by the rocks. Everyone jumped out and took cover behind boulders. The enemy vehicle skidded to a stop, and armed men started climbing out. Gunfire erupted. The situation was dire, 4 or 5 attackers against 2 shooters. We need a way around, Alan shouted, locking eyes with Maria. Tracy, Darlene, crawl back to the car, start it, and be ready. Maria and I will hold them off. The sisters obeyed, moving low. Alan fired at the enemy SUV, hitting its tires. Good. Now they can't chase us in that, he shouted. Then Darlene, sitting in the car, noticed how a gas grenade launcher fell out of her bag. Without thinking twice, she grabbed it and, leaning out of the door, tried to take aim. What are you doing? Tracy screamed. I want to help, Darlene shouted, pulling the trigger. Get into the car quickly, Alan commanded, running up to Maria's SUV. All 4 squeezed back in, and Maria wasted no time in stepping on the gas. The car took off and flew out of the canyon like a whirlwind. The wounded and incapacitated pursuers remained behind. Phew, was all Tracy said when she saw the smooth road ahead. Well done, Dar. Maria, slightly out of breath, smiled. I didn't expect you to take a grenade launcher so boldly. I didn't know what I was doing, Darlene admitted, still shaking. I just wanted to help. Alan gently shook her shoulder. Thank you. You saved us. A few hours later, they safely reached the agreed-upon place near the border. There, they were met by Alan's acquaintance named Manuel, a lean man with silver hair. He handed over a stack of documents. We'll cross the border by nightfall, either by truck or on foot through the crossing, where I have my people, he explained. Then we'll arrange the rest in Mexico City. Do you have money? Yes, Maria answered, looking down. I think it's enough for housing. Darlene felt a strange excitement. The unknown lay ahead, a new life, perhaps not too rich, but without threat. Alan stood nearby, peering into the distant lights, as if saying goodbye to the homeland that had so cruelly rejected him. Eric. Darlene called him quietly, taking his hand. "We can handle it," he said, squeezing her fingers. Together. Tracy stood on the sidelines, thinking about how everything in her life had turned upside down. Weddings, betrayal by the groom, kidnapping, running away, and now she goes to Mexico, not knowing the language and culture. But there was no other choice. "It's time," Manuel announced. "The truck will signal when it is safe. Let's get ready." 2 months have passed. Somewhere on the outskirts of Mexico City, in a modest 2-story house, lived an unusual family. Alan, Darlene, Tracy, and Maria were hiding under new names, trying to improve their lives. Tracy got a job in a small bar as a waitress and learned Spanish. Maria sometimes left for parts unknown, perhaps contacting old connections, but always returned in the evening. Darlene surprised everyone. She was able to give up casual relationships without much suffering. Now all her attention was focused on her husband. "You know," she told him one night, lying in a narrow bed under a thin blanket, "I didn't even think that I could be faithful. But now, I don't want anyone but you." Alan pressed her closer. "I'm glad. Maybe we can still take a risk and have children when we settle down." A joyful fire lit up in her eyes. "Really? Do you mind?" "Why not? Since we're starting life over again anyway, let's start for real." Darlene smiled, looking into her husband's eyes, forgetting about all the hardships. They kissed, feeling that through pain and fear they had come to something real, albeit not entirely legal, albeit in a foreign country. In the next room, Tracy sat by the window, looking at the lights of Mexico City at night. She thought about how much her sister had changed. Maybe being in danger made Darlene finally realize the value of family ties. Tracy took a sip of cheap wine and grinned. In a previous life, she despised her sister for cheating, but now she saw that people can change. Maria, returning along the dark street, remembered Alan. It was not easy for her to watch how happy he was with another. But she also felt a warm feeling, as if she had become his sister in arms and not just a secret admirer. "Maybe someday I'll find my way," she thought, hiding the pistol in the inner pocket of her jacket. They all knew that somewhere over the horizon, the shadows of their past were moving. Former colleagues, enemies, governments, and gangs. You may have to defend yourself again. But for now, they lived, loved, laughed, and made plans. This was their new beginning. Difficult, dangerous, but already free of lies. The names may have changed, but the relationship has gained real depth. And even if somewhere in the stone corridors of the CIA headquarters there was an order for their liquidation, the new life continued strong, like a sprout growing through concrete. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.